Some discoveries don't make sense, like a metal chain found 200 feet below the earth, or a fossilized shoe print pressed into stone millions of years too early. Artifacts that feel like they came from another time or another world entirely. These aren't stories. They were found, documented, and then quietly forgotten. But tonight, we're bringing them back. If you enjoy sinking into strange mysteries, they say you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends, because what you're about to hear might keep you thinking long after you've fallen asleep. The footprint left in solid rock. The discovery didn't happen in a place you'd expect. It wasn't in a museum or under a spotlight, but in the dust-covered plains of Tanzania, where the ground hardened over millions of years had kept a secret, a footprint, not recent, not even ancient by human standards, but so old it had become part of the stone itself, embedded in volcanic ash that had long since turned to solid rock. And this wasn't just one footprint. There were dozens, walking in a pair, sometimes a trio. Silent steps taken nearly 3.7 million years ago. This was Latoli, and the footprints here were not fossils in the traditional sense. These were imprints, like someone had walked across soft mud, and that moment had been flash-frozen in time. But instead of freezing, it was buried in ash from a volcanic eruption. Over time, pressure and the Earth's shifting layers turned that ash into rock, preserving every toe, arch, and heel with eerie clarity. But what made this discovery so unsettling wasn't just its age, it was how human they looked. Paleontologists expected something primitive, something hunched or misshapen. But the footprints walked in a way you and I do today, upright, balanced, confident. That alone raised eyebrows, because according to the textbooks, creatures from that time, Australopithecus afarensis, weren't supposed to walk exactly like us. But there it was, proof in stone, a quiet contradiction to what science thought it knew. Some tried to explain it away. Maybe the volcanic ash shifted, maybe erosion distorted the prints. But the more they studied it, the less plausible those excuses became. It wasn't just the Latoli footprints that raised questions. Across the world, in Glen Rose, Texas, a very different kind of mystery began to unfold along the banks of the Paluxy River. In limestone bedrock were what appeared to be fossilized dinosaur tracks. That alone wasn't odd. Texas had long been a rich fossil bed for dinosaur remains. But running alongside those dinosaur prints were what looked eerily like human footprints. Some were overlapping, others seemed to dart around or cross paths with the larger clawed tracks. Skeptics quickly jumped in, claiming hoaxes, erosion patterns, or natural formations that just happened to look like feet. Yet a few prints, when examined closely, revealed arches, defined toes, even pressure points like the foot had shifted weight, just like ours would. Of course, the scientific community was cautious. Mixing human and dinosaur timelines is blasphemy in evolutionary theory. There should be millions of years separating them, and maybe they're right. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was misidentified. But still, the imagery lingers. Human-like feet and dinosaur claws side by side, as if time had bent for a moment and allowed something impossible. What's fascinating is that this isn't just a one-time oddity. Ancient footprints in impossible places seem to pop up all over the world. In Italy, a fossil known as the Devil's Trail shows human-like footprints on an ancient volcanic slope so steep that it's hard to imagine walking down it even with modern shoes. Yet someone barefoot did, and left their mark in stone for eternity. In Botswana, Namibia, and parts of Australia, Aboriginal rock art and impressions hint at enormous feet, not human-sized. Not even giant by basketball player standards, but inhuman. Tracks so wide and deep that stories emerged of beings from another time, not metaphorical ones, actual ones. One of the strangest footprints ever reported comes from Mount Vernon, Ohio. Discovered in a sandstone layer in the 19th century, it was said to be 14 inches long with 6 toes clearly defined and deep in the rock. Some claimed it was Native American in origin. Others whispered stories of ancient giants. Most scientists dismissed it entirely, yet the footprint remains. Quiet, unexplained. It's easy to disregard these discoveries, to file them under hoaxes or misinterpretations, but what if some of them aren't? What if one, just one, was real? What does that mean for us? If a human-like being walked with dinosaurs, or left tracks in volcanic ash before we were supposed to exist, that means time, as we understand it, isn't as neat as we thought. Consider this: our entire history, our evolution, our progress, our dominance, is built on a carefully layered timeline. We know what came first, what followed, what led to what, but footprints in stone, especially in places where no such footprints should be, threaten to pull the entire thread loose. There's something powerful about a footprint. Unlike bones or tools, it's a moment, a step, a decision frozen in time. Not just that someone lived, but that they moved, with intent, across the earth. A footprint carries emotion, urgency, curiosity, or maybe fear. What was happening that day at Latoli when those ancient beings walked together? Were they fleeing something, chasing something, or simply crossing the land they called home, unaware that their walk would be seen again after millions of years? Imagine the silence of that moment, the soft ground, the warm ash, the press of skin against earth. A step that should have vanished in seconds, preserved forever. There's something humbling in that. We leave behind more than we realize, sometimes not in words, not in stone carvings, but in the most basic, human way. A footprint. And so, buried in ancient ash, or pressed into stone, these quiet remnants of steps continue to whisper to us. Not with answers, but with a single, shared mystery. Who walked here, and when? The skeleton taller than a giraffe. Imagine unearthing bones so large, your first thought is, this has to be a hoax. A femur longer than a grown man's arm. A skull that could easily cradle a football inside. But this wasn't some viral prank or movie prop. This was a real discovery. A skeleton so massive, so shockingly disproportionate, that even seasoned archaeologists stood in disbelief. The year was 1890. In a quiet corner of France near Castelnau-le-Lay, a professor named Georges Vacher de la Pouge was conducting routine excavations. His goal? Study prehistoric burial layers. What he found, however, would throw his academic world into chaos. Buried deep within the sediment, he uncovered what he called bones of extraordinary size. A humerus, a tibia, a femur. All from a single individual, each one far larger than any known human remains. He didn't just estimate, he measured, carefully, obsessively. The femur alone was over 30 inches long. According to his calculations, the individual must have stood nearly 11 feet tall, taller than a giraffe. Let that sink in. That's not someone who was just a bit tall. That's a being whose head would brush the ceiling of most modern homes, whose stride would cover twice the distance of ours in a single step. Yet there it was. Not one bone, but multiple, collected, documented, and preserved. Professor Lapouge wrote to several scientific journals. The bones were examined, published, debated, but something strange happened after that. The discussion faded, quietly, almost like it was never meant to be noticed for too long. You might think, where are the bones now? That's the troubling part. No museum displays them. No global exhibits show their scale. Most historians now refer to the skeleton as an anomaly. Some even suggest it might have been an ancient disease causing bone overgrowth. But no one denies the bones were real. They were physically there, photographed, measured. And here's where things get even more intriguing. Castelnau isn't alone. Just a few years later, in 1894, a similar find was reported in the nearby town of Montpellier. Again, an unusually large skull, much heavier, thicker, and larger than typical human skulls, was found in a Neolithic tomb. Was France hiding an ancient population of giants? Or was this some strange evolutionary outlier that vanished from our gene pool? Now pause here. Think about how ancient mythologies from nearly every part of the world, Greece, India, Native American, Norse, mention giants, always portrayed as tall, mighty, often misunderstood beings who lived long before modern humans. Are these myths truly fiction, or are they fragmented memories passed down from an ancient truth? Some researchers believe that these discoveries, like the giant of Castelnau, are part of a much larger tutu. You said, hey bro, add some human emotions and slicky rhythmic lines need. ChatGPT said, got it bro. Here's the revised chapter 2. The skeleton taller than a giraffe, with human emotions and a touch of rhythm, just enough to keep it natural, not robotic. Imagine standing in a trench, sun beating down, the air thick with dust, when suddenly you uncover something that doesn't make sense. Not a coin, not a shard, but a bone. A femur so long it stretches past your elbow to your fingertips. You pause, you measure again, you look up at your assistant and say, this can't be human, can it? That moment happened in 1890, in southern France. A quiet village called Castelnau-le-Lay became the center of a mystery, still whispered about over a century later. Professor Georges Vacher de Pouge, a man known for his precision, stumbled upon bones that didn't match any chart or textbook. A femur, a tibia, a humerus, each one grotesquely large, not malformed, just massive. He didn't panic. He measured, recorded, calculated. Then came the estimate. The person, if it was a person, would have stood over 11 feet tall, taller than a giraffe. A human, the size of a small tree. He called it the giant of Castelnau. People laughed. Newspapers ran stories with half-skeptical headlines. Scientists debated whether it was real or exaggerated. But here's the strange part. No one disproved it. The bones were real, tangible, and then they were gone. No museum holds them now. No documentary shows them in 4K. They vanished into storage, into private hands, into the fog of historical anomalies. Some say they were misplaced, others say they were buried again. This time not by earth but by fear. Fear that the past is far more complicated than we've been told. But Castelnau isn't alone. In Montpellier, not far away, another skull was found, twice the thickness of a normal human's, heavier than any in medical records. Again dated to the Neolithic period. Again, no clear answers. So let's ask the hard question. What kind of world existed before ours? Because almost every ancient culture, Greece, Mesopotamia, India, the Norse, tells stories of giants, not cartoonish ogres, but tall, noble, strange beings that once walked the earth alongside men. Were those just myths? Or are those memories? Stories passed down across generations, stripped of their context, wrapped in metaphor to survive. And if those bones were real, what happened to them? Why would something that extraordinary be hidden, silenced, buried? Maybe because it challenges the idea that we know everything, that human history is a straight line, that evolution marched on like clockwork. But discoveries like this, like the skeleton taller than a giraffe, throw a wrench into that belief. They whisper that we've forgotten something, or worse, someone. The ground remembers, the bones speak, but it's up to us to listen. The hammer trapped in stone. They didn't expect to find it there. Not in the quiet, dusty town of London, not the one in England, but the small town of London, Texas. A place where time feels like it drifts rather than marches. And one summer afternoon in the 1930s, while walking along a creek bed just outside town, a hiker and his wife noticed something strange embedded in a chunk of rock. At first glance, it didn't look like much, just another misshapen stone in a land full of them. But when they picked it up, something felt off. It was too symmetrical, too clean. A curve ran through one side, like the worn arch of a handle, and then there it was, a rusted piece of iron, clearly the head of an old hammer, but not just old, impossible, because this hammer was trapped inside solid stone. Let that sink in for a moment. A man-made iron hammer, half embedded in a chunk of rock, stone so hard it had no business holding something like this. It wasn't simply lying under a rock. The hammer was quite literally encased by it. The handle still extended out from the stone, worn with time and slightly petrified. The metal head was sealed in, as though the rock had grown around it like a pearl forming around sand. But rocks don't grow around hammers. That discovery, quiet, strange, and sitting in the palm of their hands, would go on to become one of the most debated archaeological oddities in America. Today it's called the London Artifact, and it rests in a glass display, still holding its secrets, still silent, and yet, the questions it brings are louder than ever. How could a hammer with iron forged through smelting, an industrial-age tool, end up inside stone that, by all geological measurements, appears to be over 100 million years old? That's the paradox. That's the mystery. Let's unravel it slowly. Geologists who've studied the stone claim it's from the Cretaceous period, a time when dinosaurs still roamed the earth, long before humans were supposed to exist. The rock, by all appearances, is natural. It didn't form recently, and it wasn't a trick of concrete or modern tampering. The process that forms that type of rock, called sandstone concretion, takes millions of years under the right conditions, and yet, the hammer seems modern in shape. It has a simple rectangular iron head, with smooth edges and a slight indentation, like where a craftsman might have gripped it for balance. The wooden handle was partially petrified, hardened by the same minerals that formed the stone around it. Some tests even showed the iron was unusually pure, around 96% iron, with traces of chlorine and sulfur. That's much higher than most commercial iron tools we make today. Which begs another question. If this was forged by humans, where did they get such a pure iron source? And if it's truly that old, what kind of humans were around 100 million years ago, building hammers out of advanced metal? According to mainstream science, none. Absolutely none. Humans, as we know them, didn't appear on Earth until roughly 300,000 years ago. And metal tools, those didn't become common until about 5,000 years ago. This hammer doesn't fit in either timeline. It's like it fell through the cracks of history, or slipped through the seams of time. And still, it's real. You can visit it. It sits at the Creation Evidence Museum in Texas, where it's been on display since the 1980s. Some call it a hoax. Others insist it's genuine. There's never been a full consensus. But even the most skeptical scientists admit one thing. The rock formation appears very old, and the embedding isn't something easily faked. So let's consider the possibilities. Possibility 1. The hammer was dropped into a crack in soft rock, and the surrounding minerals slowly hardened around it over a few hundred years. But that theory collapses when you study the depth of mineral fusion. The rock isn't just surrounding the hammer, it's bonded with it. The petrification of the handle alone suggests far longer than a few hundred years. Possibility 2. Ancient civilizations existed long before recorded history, with metalworking knowledge we don't currently acknowledge. This leads us into forbidden archaeology, studies that explore the idea that our timeline is wrong, that humans or human-like beings may have developed advanced knowledge millions of years ago, only to vanish through extinction or catastrophe. It's a theory that leads down a winding road of lost cities, sunken continents, and whispered legends, because if this hammer is truly that old, then who made it, and what happened to them? Let's take a detour. All over the world, there are artifacts that don't belong. UPARTs, short for out-of-place artifacts. Items that appear far too advanced or located in regions and rock layers they have no business being in. A metal sphere found in a Precambrian mine in South Africa, dated to 2.8 billion years old. A spark plug found embedded in a geode, fossilized footprints next to dinosaur tracks in Glen Rose, Texas. And now, a hammer, sealed in ancient stone. Are these all mistakes? Misidentifications? Hoaxes? Possibly, but not all. Some resist easy explanation. Some challenge the very core of our human timeline. What's most important is how they make us feel. Because when you hold the London artifact, or even look at it in a photo, you feel a quiet discomfort, a sense that something doesn't quite add up, that maybe, just maybe, our understanding of history is like a puzzle with missing pieces. Or worse, the wrong picture on the box. That's the power of mystery. It humbles us, reminds us that for all our science, all our knowledge, there are still things buried deep in stone, unchanged, unyielding, and silent, that mock the straight lines we draw through time. The London hammer might be one of those things. It could be a misdated oddity, or it could be a whisper from a forgotten age, one where hands not unlike our own carved tools from iron and shaped their world before disappearing beneath the sands of time. Whatever the truth is, the rock remains sealed, and the hammer, rusted and quiet, still waits, not to be understood, just to be found. The skull with horns found in a cave. Somewhere in the hills of northern Pennsylvania, tucked away in the shadow of ancient ridges, there lies a story that many still refuse to believe. A tale whispered through local folklore, dusted off in faded newspapers, and locked in the silence of museum vaults. It begins not with fantasy, but with excavation. And what was found was a human skull. But not just any skull. This one had horns. The year was 1880. A group of scientists and antiquarians began excavating a burial mound in Sayre, a small town near the New York border. The mound itself seemed like many others, just another part of the rich Native American earthwork heritage that dots the eastern United States. But as they dug deeper, their trowels struck something unexpected. First came the bones, massive bones, human but not ordinary. These skeletons measured over 7 feet tall, towering over the average man of their time, but it was the skulls that truly rattled them. Because just above the brow, extending upward and curving slightly back, were bone protrusions, horns. Not horns like those of an animal, not loosely attached. These were extensions of the skull itself, integrated, biological, grown, and suddenly, everything the team knew about human history cracked a little. The remains were carefully packed and sent to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia. There, anthropologists verified their age, at least several hundred years old. Some estimated they dated back to around 1200 AD. The skulls were indeed human in shape, but with anomalies that couldn't be brushed off as deformities or mutations. The newspapers caught on. "Horned giants unearthed in Pennsylvania," the headlines screamed. It sounded like a biblical echo, stories of Nephilim, of watchers, of ancient beings who once roamed the earth. But in this case, there were bones, photographs, measurements. Then, silence. The bones, like many strange discoveries of the late 19th century, were reported to have been lost. Some say they vanished during a transfer between institutions. Others believe they were locked away to avoid academic controversy. Either way, the Sayre skulls became legend, not myth, documented legend. Skeptics have long tried to debunk the story. They say the newspapers exaggerated the features, that no museum would lose something so monumental, but defenders point to archived letters, expedition notes, and the credibility of the professionals involved at the time. So what if it's true? What if, hundreds of years ago, a tribe, or something else, walked these forests, carrying traits no longer found in modern humanity? Traits that challenge our definition of what it means to be human. And what of the horns? In ancient cultures, horns often symbolized power, divinity, authority. The gods of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even early Christianity were depicted with radiant horns or halos, extensions of the head that elevated them beyond mortals. What if those stories were echoes of something real? Imagine stumbling into that cave yourself. It's dark, damp, the air is heavy with age. You push deeper, brushing past moss-covered stone and decayed roots. Then you see it, an odd shape in the soil. You clear it carefully, expecting rock, but what you find is bone, and rising from the cranium, curving slightly back, like a question never answered, are two horns. Your breath slows. Time holds still. Because this isn't just an archaeological find, this is a riddle. One that asks who we really were, and who else might have shared this world with us. Could these horned beings have been outcasts, gods, genetic branches that were wiped out by time or conflict? Or were they something not even human? The cave in Sayre has long since collapsed, and official institutions no longer mention the skulls, but rumors persist of private collectors who possess photos or museum employees who saw more than they were allowed to say. Even in recent years, blurry images occasionally surface online, claiming to show horned skulls locked in backroom collections. And yet, nothing definitive. Perhaps the horned ones lived in a forgotten age, when lines between myth and biology were blurred. Perhaps they still live in dusty boxes, behind steel doors, in institutions too cautious to rewrite history. Or perhaps they never left. The three-fingered mummy that shocked scientists. It all began with a whisper. Not the kind that floats through a crowd or ripples through the pages of history books, but a quieter, stranger one. A whisper from beneath the sands of Peru. In a dry, desolate stretch near Nazca, something peculiar was found. A body, small, shriveled, lying flat on a dusty table, wrapped in silence. But it wasn't the size or the condition of the body that sent a chill through researchers. It was the hands. 3 fingers, long, slender, bone-white. Not 4, not 5, just 3. When the photos leaked online, the internet didn't know what to do. Some cried hoax immediately. Others whispered, "This is not human." The mummy was given a name, not an ancient one, but a placeholder, Maria, a modern name for something so ancient it defied classification. She wasn't found in a tomb, not in the traditional sense. Instead, she had been lying hidden inside a crevice, a shallow chamber tucked inside a stone outcrop, and when she was removed, dust trailing from her limbs like dry smoke, something felt off. She looked peaceful, yet wrong, too symmetrical, too clean, as if she had been waiting. Now let's talk about the anatomy. The skull, elongated, not due to ritual deformation, researchers claimed, but naturally shaped. The bone density, odd. The eye sockets, larger than normal, and of course the fingers, longer than any modern humans by far, and only 3. Some said it looked like she was designed to press keys on some unseen machine. Others said she looked like a drawing from a child's alien encounter story. And yet, she was real. She was right there, being touched, scanned, x-rayed. That's when the questions began. Was she human or part human? Was it a birth defect, a ritualistic disfigurement, or was this not human at all? Samples were taken, tissue scraped, skin examined, bone scanned. DNA tests began in quiet labs. Independent experts flew to Peru, some from universities, some not. And then came the results, mixed, confusing. One lab reported human female DNA. Another said it didn't match anything in the current human genome database. Then came the theories. Aliens? A forgotten hominid species? A hoax built from animal bones and sculpted clay? Every theory had a counter-theory. Every claim met with a skeptic's rebuttal. Yet no one could explain one thing. How did this body survive in such perfect mummification, with skin still clinging to bone, for what some claimed was over 1,000 years? No wrappings, no traditional Incan preservation methods, just dry desert air, as if something wanted her to last, to be found, later. And she wasn't alone. Soon, more bodies appeared. A baby-sized mummy with the same 3 fingers. Another adult male, perhaps, all showing the same bizarre features. Some with implanted metal pieces under the skin. One even had signs of ancient surgery, what looked like a metal mesh embedded in the skull. Who were they? Were they even from here? Of course, mainstream scientists stepped in. They warned against jumping to conclusions. Some called it a modern fabrication. Others pointed to natural deformities, suggesting it was simply a person with a severe birth disorder. But those who saw the mummy in person, they weren't so quick to dismiss it. One researcher, after running scans on the bones, said quietly, "There's something here that we don't understand." You can almost picture her in that lab, late at night, alone with the X-rays, flickering light, quiet hum of machines, and that 3-fingered hand resting in the corner of the screen, not grasping, just waiting. Let's talk about the setting again. Nazca, a place already heavy with mystery, home of the massive Nazca lines, geometric patterns and animal shapes carved into the earth so large they can only be seen from the sky. Who made those? Why? And now, a 3-fingered being lying nearby. Coincidence feels thinner and thinner here. The Peruvian government got involved, then pulled back. Too many questions, too many risks of tourism damage, they said. But behind the scenes, rumors swirled that Maria's body had quietly changed hands, that it had been moved from Peru to another country, that a tech billionaire had bought access to it. that the real research was being done in secret, and through all that, photos kept leaking, CT scans, videos of her body slowly rotating on lab platforms, still, frozen, 3 fingers crossed gently over her chest. Now imagine this. You're lying in bed, eyes closed, and the desert is around you. Dry wind, cracked stones. Somewhere in the dark, just beneath the ground, she's still there. Not gone, not buried, just waiting. It makes you wonder, how many other things like Maria lie waiting to be found, not by explorers, not by archaeologists, but by accident, by a traveler walking off the path, a child climbing into a cave, a worker digging a foundation. What if the world we know is just the surface layer, and beneath it, beneath the textbooks and maps, there's a different story entirely? A story written not with words, but with hands, 3-fingered ones. The marble head with modern-era facial features. When archaeologists unearthed the marble head, no one expected to feel watched. It wasn't just the craftsmanship that drew them in. It was the eyes, the shape of the mouth, the texture of the skin, smooth, yet not idealized like most ancient sculpture. This head looked real, too real, like someone you might pass in a train station, someone you'd swear you've seen before. But the statue, carved from stone so old it had nearly fused with the soil, wasn't supposed to be here or look like this. What happens when an ancient artifact appears thousands of years ahead of its time? The site was routine. A dig in the Mediterranean, not far from where other fragments of Roman and Greek antiquity had been found. Most of the team expected amphora shards or faded coins. But this was different. Nestled among older ruins, the head sat nearly untouched, as though the soil had decided not to disturb it. The nose wasn't broken, the lips weren't worn, and the strangest part, the face wasn't stylized. It had expression. Soft tension in the brow, a glint of resolve in the cheeks, slight asymmetry in the jawline, all features common in modern portraiture, but unheard of in early antiquity. Ancient statues typically followed ideal proportions, godlike forms, serene, detached expressions. But this one didn't conform. It looked human, not a human from 2,000 years ago, a human from now. Some experts thought it might be a hoax, maybe even a modern art piece someone planted to stir controversy, but the marble told a different story. Tests on the material placed it as quarried in the same time period as other Roman-era statues nearby. The oxidation patterns, the layering of mineral deposits, all matched its surrounding context. So, how? Why would a face so modern, so distinct, be carved by artists who had never seen anything like this before? One theory suggests it was simply ahead of its time. Maybe a gifted sculptor, unknown to history, dared to reject tradition. Maybe they carved a friend, a lover, or even themselves, someone real, not divine. It's a beautiful idea, but it doesn't explain the accuracy, because even now, in the age of 3D modeling and AI face mapping, sculpting something this detailed takes weeks of precision. The tools required to chisel at that level didn't exist, not in that time, and still, the face stares back at us, like it remembers something we've forgotten. Some call it an anomaly. Others, those who look closer, call it a message. The ears are shaped just slightly differently from classical norms. The eyelids have subtle crow's feet etched into the corners. There's a mole near the chin, almost hidden, like the artist wanted it seen only by those who truly observe. Every small imperfection is deliberate, grounded, intimate. It's the opposite of divine. It's personal. But here's where it gets stranger. Facial recognition software, used on the sculpture as part of a university experiment, flagged the features as a 97% match to modern-day Mediterranean populations. Not just broadly Mediterranean, but regional to a few coastal towns still inhabited today. That might seem unsurprising, except the population has changed dramatically over the last 1,000 years. This face shouldn't match anyone living today, and yet, it does. Could this be evidence of a lost lineage? A forgotten civilization whose aesthetic values were more aligned with our own? Or could it be something more unsettling? Proof that someone, somehow, knew what future humans would look like. A whisper from the past, of the present. What's most haunting is the feeling visitors describe when they stand before the marble head in the museum now. They say it feels like meeting an old friend, like you're being watched, not in a sinister way, but as if the statue is quietly waiting for you to say something it already knows. Some say the statue may be a relic of an older world, not Roman, not Greek, something even before them. A civilization that rose and vanished long before written language, leaving behind only fragments buried too deep to find. Others say it's a message sent backward. Time is not a straight line after all. What if time folds? What if a modern mind dreamed a face, and that dream echoed backward, inspiring the hand of a sculptor 2,000 years ago? Unlikely, yes, but not impossible. Consider the many cases of artistic precognition, Painters capturing events before they happen, composers writing songs that mirror future feelings. Art is strange, time is stranger. Combine the two, and you might just create something that doesn't belong anywhere at all. The statue remains unnamed, no inscription, no context, just that face, resting forever in carved stillness, whispering questions across centuries, a reminder that the past, no matter how ancient, sometimes knows us better than we know ourselves. The gold coin found beneath a T-Rex bone bed. It started with bones, giant ones. In a wide, dry stretch of badlands, a group of paleontologists was carefully unearthing what looked like the remains of a massive predator. The bones were jumbled, likely due to flooding, time, and pressure, but the shape was unmistakable. A Tyrannosaurus rex, one of the largest ever found. The team had been at the site for days. Dust blew over their tents. The sun carved deep shadows into the rock. They were used to strange finds, fragments of other animals, bits of petrified wood, even traces of ancient pollen. But on this particular morning, just beneath the clawed foot of the massive dinosaur, they found something that didn't belong. A flash of gold. At first they thought it was pyrite, fool's gold, a common mineral that can shimmer when the sun hits it just right. But when they gently brushed away the soil, they realized it wasn't stone at all. It was a coin. A coin, beneath a T-Rex. Impossible. They paused, cleaned around the object with care, and soon the full shape revealed itself. Round, stamped, edged in tiny ridges, heavier than it looked, and old. Not dinosaur old, but still ancient by human standards. It had markings, a face on one side, symbols, maybe a wreath on the other. No one recognized it immediately, no country claimed it, no date printed. It didn't belong there, not in the fossil bed, not under a creature extinct for 65 million years. So how did it get there? The area had been undisturbed for millennia. The sediment layers were clean, no signs of human presence until well above the layer where the dinosaur rested, which meant that coin, somehow, had ended up beneath the T-Rex fossils. The first theory? Contamination. Maybe a prank. Maybe someone dropped a coin, and it sank down through cracks in the sediment, but the coin wasn't near the surface. It was buried deep, sealed beneath meters of rock that hadn't shifted in tens of millions of years. The rock itself had to be chipped away to reveal it. The second theory was even stranger. Time slip. Some suggested a geological anomaly. Maybe an earthquake had jumbled the layers and repositioned newer material downward. But that didn't match the structure of the site. No breaks, no folding. The strata were intact, undisturbed, clean. Then the whispers started. Some believed the coin was proof of something we don't yet understand. That ancient civilizations or beings existed long before we think they could have. Civilizations that left traces where they shouldn't. Or worse, civilizations that visited a world already home to dinosaurs. One fringe theory involved time travel. That perhaps, far in the future, someone journeyed to the past, dropped the coin, and left a trace behind. It sounds like science fiction, but standing in front of a T-Rex bone bed, holding a minted gold coin, logic starts to bend. Others believe the site itself may be layered with more secrets, that this coin isn't an accident, but a key to something deeper. Some researchers noticed the coin didn't quite match any known currency. The material was gold, but alloyed with something unusual, possibly meteoric in origin. Tiny magnetic disturbances rippled from it. Not enough to set off alarms, but enough to confuse the scanning equipment. And the markings? They weren't from any known empire. The symbols were strange. Loops, stars, interlocking circles, like a code, or a signature. An ancient language? A futuristic one? No one knew. But what if the coin wasn't meant to be used? What if it was an artifact, or a marker? A token left on purpose? A message across time? We've found human-made objects in coal seams, nails and stones, apparent tools in places where humans hadn't yet existed. Most are dismissed as mistakes, hoaxes, or misinterpretations. But every so often, something slips through that resists explanation. The coin beneath the T-Rex claw is one of them. To this day it remains locked away in a university lab. No official paper has been published on it. No museum display. Only quiet notes. Photos kept out of public view. Researchers changed subjects. The dig site was closed. A new narrative quietly emerged. One that ignored the coin. But the people who were there remember. They say there's something about holding it that doesn't feel right. Like you're touching a contradiction. A fracture in the story of time. Some whisper it was taken. Others say it was destroyed. But a few believe it's still out there, hidden, waiting for someone to uncover the rest of the story. Because if one coin exists, what else lies buried beneath the bones of giants? The cylinder that echoed with music when tapped. It looked like a piece of pottery, nothing more. A cylindrical shape, roughly the size of a forearm, with faint geometric patterns etched into its surface, found half buried in sediment, near the ruins of an abandoned settlement. The object was initially dismissed, catalogued, boxed, and left among hundreds of other recovered shards. No one realized it was different until someone tapped it. A gentle flick of a finger. Not hard, just enough to hear how hollow it was. And then the sound came. Not a normal ring, not the dull clink of fired clay, but something melodic. It echoed, carried, long and strange, like a singing bowl except deeper, with layers, tones within tones. The sound didn't fade quickly. It lingered, almost shimmered. People nearby turned their heads, unsure what they'd just heard. It didn't sound like a broken piece of pottery. It sounded crafted, intentionally tuned. The researcher who tapped it tried again. Another soft flick, this time at a different point on the cylinder's surface. A different note, softer, slightly higher, a clear change. Now they were curious. The object was cleaned, x-rayed, scanned. It wasn't hollow like a vase. Its interior structure was complex. Chambers and ridges, almost like an acoustic maze. It looked like it was built to carry sound, to enhance it. But this artifact was thousands of years old. There were no speakers, no wires, no evidence of modern sound engineering, just fired clay and a strange knowledge of resonance. They called it the echo cylinder. At first, some thought it was a kind of ancient toy, maybe an accident of craftsmanship. But the more they studied it, the less accidental it seemed. The grooves on the outside weren't just decorative. They followed precise spacing, spiraled, aligned with certain ridges inside. When tapped in sequence, along certain etched lines, the cylinder didn't just make sound, it played a melody. One researcher managed to record it, a pattern of low and high tones. Not random, structured, intentional. They began testing similar artifacts from the same dig. Most were silent, typical broken bowls, jars, or ceremonial items. But a second cylinder, shorter, and with more pronounced ridges, also sang when struck. Its tone was higher, quicker, sharper, but again, musical. Someone suggested these were ancient instruments, but there were no strings, no reeds, no moving parts, just shaped clay, and the hands that made it. Still, when placed inside a quiet room and tapped lightly, the resonance filled the space. It wasn't loud, but it was pure, like striking crystal in a still cave. And here's where the mystery deepens. The site where the cylinders were found had no written language, no records of music, no obvious theaters or temples, just a simple community, adobe dwellings, storage pits, and fire circles. Nothing that hinted at advanced acoustic understanding. So how did they do it? How did these ancient people know how to shape sound? Some believe the knowledge came from observation, that early humans were sensitive to the way sound bounced off stone, clay, and wood, that they learned over generations how to build shapes that enhanced vibrations, perhaps not through science, but through intuition. Others think it was spiritual. That sound, especially certain tones, was seen as sacred, that echo chambers were tools for ritual, that the cylinders weren't for music, but for communication with something unseen. There are traditions across the world of using bowls, gongs, and drums not to entertain, but to reach, to alter the mind, to summon presence. Maybe these cylinders served a similar role. One theory stands out among the others, that the cylinders weren't standalone items, but components, that they were once embedded into walls or placed in specific locations. Sound chambers, resonant architecture. Imagine a structure, long since collapsed, where these cylinders were hidden inside, and when the wind blew, or when someone sang or chanted, the chambers would respond, echo, amplify, create harmonics that shifted the atmosphere of the space. Imagine a temple that sang with you, that echoed your voice not once, but in layered tones, tuned to alter your breath, your heart rate, even your sense of time. The artifact, then, isn't the whole mystery, it's just a fragment, a puzzle piece. In one experiment, a group placed the cylinder inside a narrow stone corridor and tapped it while microphones measured the sound. The echoes didn't bounce randomly. They formed standing waves, points where sound pooled, hung in the air. Some tones even seemed to vanish, cancelled by the shape of the space itself. It was almost too precise. As if the artifact belonged in such a space, as if it was made to be part of something larger. Over time, more of these cylinders have surfaced in other digs. None exactly the same, but with common features. Spiraled grooves, double chambers, clay fired at unusually high temperatures. They show no signs of repair, no decorations, no inscriptions, just sound. Some of the researchers now refer to them as resonant tools, not quite instruments, not quite ritual items, but something more advanced. A lost art of sound, and perhaps, if we listen carefully, something ancient still speaks through them. The burnt bone carving of a humanoid figure. It was blackened when they found it, burnt all the way through. A jagged shard of animal bone, splintered at one end, hollow at the other. At first glance it looked like debris, the remains of an old fire, something that had been tossed in and forgotten. But someone noticed the markings. The lines weren't random. They followed a pattern. And more than that, they formed a shape. Not a symbol, not a script, but a figure. A humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head shaped like an oval, carved directly into the surface of the bone, not with a metal blade, but with something primitive, sharpened stone, maybe obsidian. The lines were uneven but purposeful, every stroke placed with intent. This wasn't art for decoration, it wasn't abstract, it was a figure, a being, a presence. But why had it been burned? That question still hasn't been answered. Some say it was an accident, that the object was part of a larger find, maybe dropped in a hearth or used as fuel by someone unaware of its significance. But the way the bone was scorched, it didn't look accidental. It was evenly blackened across the surface, not charred from one side. It had been placed directly in fire, on purpose. So now the mystery wasn't just what the carving was, but why it was burned. Let's go back to where it was discovered. A remote cave, long buried under layers of collapsed rock. It wasn't even meant to be excavated. The site had been passed over for years until shifting earth revealed a narrow entrance. When researchers finally went inside, they found a small chamber, roughly circular, barely large enough for a handful of people to stand. There were no murals, no paintings, no signs of long-term living, but in the ash-covered floor, buried among fragments of broken antlers and animal teeth, was this single carved bone. That was it. No duplicates, no matching pieces, just one. Some thought it was a toy, others, a talisman. But when they scanned it under infrared and looked closely at the wear, they realized something odd. The bone had been held, frequently, not just tossed in a fire. Someone had carried it. Over time, the oils from skin had smoothed its edges. The tip of the carved figure's head was worn down, not broken, but touched, over and over, like someone had rubbed it, like it meant something. And the figure itself, while roughly humanoid, wasn't fully human. It had elongated limbs. The arms were too long. The legs were bent at unnatural angles. The head, slightly oversized. The shape didn't quite match the skeletal structure of any known hominid. It was close, but just off enough to feel strange. And yet the face, or what passed for a face, had been carefully shaped. 2 deep indentations for eyes, a narrow slit for a mouth, no nose. The proportions didn't match the people who supposedly carved it. Some researchers began calling it the Ash Walker, a name taken from local legends. Stories of shadowy figures who wandered between fires, neither spirit nor beast. But those were myths. Folklore passed down in oral tradition. Still, the name stuck. Because whatever this figure was meant to represent, it didn't feel human. It felt other. There's an unsettling part of this discovery. The bone itself didn't match the species it came from. Based on initial analysis, it belonged to a large mammal, likely extinct. But the carving depicted something smaller, humanoid. Why carve one creature onto the remains of another? Unless the bone wasn't just a canvas, unless it was chosen because of what it once was. You see, in many ancient cultures, bone was sacred. It held memory, spirit, strength. Burning it wasn't destruction, it was transformation, a ritual, a way of releasing energy. So what if this wasn't just a carving? What if it was a ritual object, something made to represent a being that wasn't part of the physical world but the other one? What if the bone was used not in death, but in summoning? That's a theory some anthropologists now suggest. That this figure wasn't decorative, it was functional, a charm, a tool, something carved during a rite. And when its purpose was complete, it was burned to sever the connection. There are other hints too. In the cave, surrounding the ash where the bone was found, were tiny indentations in the floor. Circular, evenly spaced, as if small stones or artifacts had once been arranged there. Possibly a ritual circle, a boundary, a place for performance or invocation. And this is where things get stranger. On the bone, near the carved figure's chest, is a small repeated marking. 3 lines, parallel, cut deeper than the rest of the body, like a symbol or a signature. The same mark was found etched onto a stone several meters outside the cave, almost identical in size and depth. Coincidence? Or was it a sign? One that pointed to something lost, a belief system, a mythology that predates anything we have written record of. Something that saw the world as alive, not just with animals and plants, but with beings. Shapes that walked between the seen and the unseen. The carving on the burnt bone could be one of those shapes. And perhaps what disturbs people most is how familiar it looks. Not because we recognize it from history, but because we recognize it from dreams. That outline, tall, lean, dark-limbed, echoes through stories across time. Shadow figures, visitors, night watchers, entities seen in trances and recalled through ancient lore. The Ash Walker, the burnt guardian, The being in the bone. No matter the name, it stirs something old, not quite fear, but memory, of things we've seen and forgotten. The metal chain found 200 feet underground in a mine. It wasn't supposed to be there. 200 feet below the surface, deep inside a layer of solid coal, the workers were just doing what they always did, chipping away at black rock, pulling out chunks, loading them into carts. The air was thick with dust, the light dim. There was no expectation of anything unusual, until the pickaxe struck metal. At first, they thought it was just an old tool, maybe something dropped by another worker. But when they cleared away the coal, they saw it wasn't loose. It was embedded in the rock, not resting on it, not sitting between cracks. The chain was inside the coal seam, 8 inches long, iron, forged links, fused together by time. It took hours to remove carefully, without snapping it. When they did, the surface was worn but unmistakably shaped. Oval links, hammered shut at the ends, with tiny imperfections that revealed it had been crafted by hand. That alone was strange, but what made it truly mysterious was the age of the coal around it. That seam was millions of years old. This wasn't a 200-year-old tool that fell into a shaft. It was inside a geological layer dated to around 300 million years ago. That shouldn't be possible. Human beings, modern ones, weren't even imagined back then. Dinosaurs hadn't evolved yet. The world was swamps and primitive forests, filled with strange spore-bearing plants and insects the size of dogs. There were no forges, no fire, no hands to shape metal, and yet this chain existed. So how did it get there? Some said it was a hoax, that someone planted it. But miners don't carry chains into sealed coal faces. And even if they did, they wouldn't bury them in rock so dense it had to be cracked open with heavy tools. Others thought maybe it had somehow fallen into a crack and got pressed into the rock later. But coal seams don't form like that. The pressure is immense, and the rock layers form over eons. Something falling in later would sit on top, not inside. So once the hoax theories fell apart, people started asking deeper questions. What kind of chain was this? It wasn't decorative. It wasn't jewelry. The iron was rough, not polished. The links were uniform, but not perfect. It looked functional, industrial, something meant to bear weight, but not machine-made, not like the ones we mass-produce today. Who made it? That question still haunts researchers. Some began comparing it to artifacts from early human civilizations, ancient Sumerian ironwork, pre-dynastic metallurgy, but nothing matched. The size of the links didn't align with known uses. It wasn't part of armor. It wasn't for binding. It looked out of place, as if it came from a completely different context, one that doesn't exist in our historical timeline. Then the deeper theories started. What if the chain came from a civilization lost to time? Not Atlantis, not a mythical land, but something even older, a culture that lived before the known fossil record, before the Ice Age, before even the concept of written language. Is that possible? Most scientists say no, but the chain exists. That's the problem. You can dismiss stories of giants and out-of-place fossils, but when you hold forged iron in your hand that came out of a rock formed before mammals walked the earth, you have to start asking uncomfortable questions. One idea is that it's not human at all, that the chain wasn't made by a civilization like ours, but by something else entirely. Something intelligent, something that lived here long before us. There are legends, buried deep in forgotten mythologies, of worlds before the world, of ages that came and ended, leaving behind only fragments. Some old Native American traditions speak of cycles, 4 or 5 worlds that rose and fell before this one, and in each, the earth was reset. Could the chain be a piece from one of those forgotten ages? A remnant, locked in stone, waiting to be found? Or was it something even stranger? What if the chain wasn't made on Earth at all? That's what some fringe theorists have proposed, that the object was part of something non-terrestrial, not alien in the flying saucer sense, but ancient, something that fell from the sky long before life as we know it emerged. Maybe a probe, a fragment, something that embedded itself deep into primordial Earth and was buried by time. Far-fetched? Maybe, but the chain is real. It was reportedly analyzed, the metal tested, no signs of modern manufacturing, no residues of modern pollutants, just ancient iron, oxidized in a way that suggests it had been underground for a very, very long time. And that brings us to another possibility. What if our dating is wrong? What if coal doesn't take millions of years to form? Some have tried to argue that rapid coalification could explain it, that perhaps the rock wasn't as old as believed. But that opens an even bigger question. How many other things might be buried in ancient rock layers? Because if the coal is younger, then what else is trapped in it? And if it's not younger, then how do we explain the chain? It's been called anomalous, out of place, unexplainable, but the truth is, we don't have the right language for it, because no category fits. A chain like that, if truly as old as the coal around it, shifts the entire timeline of technology. It implies either an ancient intelligence we've completely forgotten, or that our understanding of Earth's history is missing entire chapters. Whichever it is, the silence around it speaks volumes. The artifact itself vanished from public view. Some say it was taken for private study. Others believe it's been lost. No museum has it on display. No official academic paper ever gave it a definitive explanation, just a quiet mention in old mining records, a strange entry in local newspapers from the 1890s. And yet, the story persists. Because once you see that chain, once you hold something forged by unknown hands, you start to wonder, what else is buried deep below us? What other objects are hiding in coal seams and sediment and stone, waiting to be uncovered? And what will they say about who came before us? The frozen deer with a piece of wooden staff. Imagine trekking across a silent glacier, where time has stood still for thousands of years. The air is crisp, unmoving. Each step crunches lightly through layers of ancient frost. The only sound is your breath and the quiet creak of distant ice. You're not expecting to find anything out here, just frozen rock, endless snow, and the remains of a world long gone. But then, just as the wind picks up for a moment, you spot something half buried in the ice. A curve of bone, the remains of an animal. Not just any animal, a deer, frozen solid. But there's something else too. Pressed into the ice beside it is a piece of carved wood. It's wedged against the deer's ribcage, like it had fallen with it, or maybe had even been carried. Not a branch, not a root, but something carved, something shaped, and suddenly, the past doesn't feel so distant anymore. When researchers first examined the find, they weren't sure what they were looking at. The deer itself looked old, ice age old. Its fur was matted, but intact. Eyes long dried and shrunken. The hooves still looked strong, but it was the object frozen next to it that caught everyone's attention. A staff. Or at least, that's what it looked like. A piece of ancient wood about half a meter long, curved slightly and smoothed in places, with subtle markings carved along its side, marks that didn't seem like natural weathering. They looked intentional, decorative, almost like symbols. But what was it doing there? Deer don't use tools. They don't carry things around. So what was this wooden staff doing, lodged against its ribs, frozen along with it for who knows how long? Initial theories were cautious. Could it have just been a coincidence? Maybe the deer fell and died near a broken branch. Maybe it rolled and twisted as it froze, pinning the stick under its body. But the more researchers looked at the positioning, the more unusual it seemed. The piece of wood wasn't just lying under the deer, it was nestled in, as if placed. Its surface had been protected from decay in a way that suggested it was tucked into the ribcage before the body froze completely. One theory suggests it was part of a primitive trap, a tool made by early humans to catch animals like deer, that perhaps this deer was one of their victims, caught in a snare, and that the staff was part of the mechanism. But that idea runs into problems. For one, the wood looks far too decorative to be utilitarian. Traps don't usually feature carved symbols, they're functional, crude. This piece looked deliberate, like it had meaning. So the next possibility was much stranger. Could it be that the deer had been part of some kind of ritual, that early humans had sacrificed the animal, placed the staff beside it, and left it in the snow? Perhaps not as a kill, but as an offering. There are examples in archaeology where humans buried or froze animals with objects, sometimes food, sometimes tools, sometimes symbols of status or belief. Could this be one of those cases? And if so, why a deer? Why this particular animal? And what did the staff represent? Carbon dating of the wooden piece suggested it was over 12,000 years old, matching the tail end of the last ice age. That was a time when humans were still largely nomadic, hunting and foraging across Europe and Asia. But they weren't just surviving, they were thinking, imagining, building beliefs, forming rituals. The deer in question showed no signs of trauma, no cuts, no broken bones, which made the theory of a sacrifice more believable. Perhaps it had died naturally, or been chosen for its appearance. Some Ice Age cultures believed certain animals were sacred, connected to the spirits of the land or sky. Deer in particular were often associated with transformation, rebirth, and seasonal change. Could this frozen deer have been seen as a messenger, a bridge between worlds? The carved markings on the wood offered even more fuel for speculation. Not a language, not quite, but they followed a pattern, a rhythm. Some lines curved like waves, others formed a grid. Researchers compared them to other artifacts from the same period and found vague similarities to shamanic objects, rattles, wands, and staffs used in rituals. But none were quite like this one. So what are we left with? A frozen deer, perfectly preserved for millennia. A carved staff, older than many civilizations. A mystery where animal meets artifact in a place where neither should have lasted this long. It doesn't make sense, and yet, it's there. Some skeptics dismiss the whole thing as coincidence, a freak alignment of time and nature, but others see something more. They see a forgotten practice, perhaps a sacred ritual that's been lost to time. Others go further, wondering if the object wasn't made by humans at all, that maybe it was made for them, or left behind by something we've long stopped believing in. What keeps the mystery alive is how little we know. The object hasn't been decoded, the markings haven't been translated, the cultural context, if it ever existed, is gone. All we have is the moment, frozen in time. The deer, the staff, the silence of the glacier. Some have wondered, what if the staff was more than symbolic? What if it had a purpose? Could it have been part of a shaman's ritual to guide the deer's spirit? Could it have been a healing object, buried with the animal as a form of primitive medicine or respect? Or was it meant to be found thousands of years later, by us? It's easy to imagine someone long ago, kneeling beside the fallen deer, placing the object carefully into position, maybe whispering something into the cold wind, then walking away, leaving it to the snow, not knowing, or maybe hoping that someone, someday, would find it again. The frozen deer with the wooden staff isn't just an artifact, it's a question, a message across time. One that speaks in silence, that asks us to remember that even in the Ice Age, humans weren't just hunting, they were thinking, feeling, believing, and sometimes, leaving messages behind. The skull covered in strange symbols of an unknown script. When archaeologists first uncovered the human skull buried deep beneath the dry soil of a remote region, no one anticipated what lay beneath the dust. It looked at first like any other skeletal remain, sun-bleached and worn by time. But as they brushed away the last layer of sediment, they saw something that made them freeze, etched directly into the surface of the skull, around the temples, along the brow and behind the crown, were tiny, deliberate carvings. Lines, loops, dots. Not random marks, but clear symbols, an entire unknown script, impossibly precise, carved into ancient human bone. The questions began immediately. Who would carve into a human skull? When was it done? Why does the writing look like no known ancient language? And most strangely, how could the bone have survived such delicate carvings without cracking or crumbling? No one had seen anything like it before. At first, researchers thought it might be a hoax. They ran tests on the bone. Radiocarbon dating placed it between 5,000 and 6,000 years old, long before known written languages had even emerged. The carvings, under a microscope, showed no signs of modern tools. The edges were worn, slightly eroded, perfectly matching the aging of the bone. This wasn't something recent, this was old, very old. But the script was still a mystery. Linguists were brought in. They compared it to ancient Sumerian, Linear A, the Vinca symbols of old Europe, even to Mayan glyphs. But it matched none of them. The orientation was odd, spiraling inward like a maze. Some of the symbols were repeated, but never quite in the same pattern. It was as if someone had written in a code, in a language no one alive could recognize. This wasn't the only strange detail. The skull showed signs of an ancient surgical procedure, trepanation, a clean circular hole near the top of the head, partially healed. That meant the person had survived the procedure. In many ancient cultures, trepanation was performed to relieve pressure, but in others, it was used in rituals. Some believed it allowed visions, others believed it let spirits enter or leave the body. Was this skull part of a forgotten ritual tradition? As word spread, theories multiplied. Some believed it was a ceremonial object, used in death rites, perhaps meant to preserve a soul. Others thought it could be a kind of coded record, preserved in bone. There were even wilder ideas, that it was a warning, or a message sent through time, that the person had been marked while alive, or after death, that the skull was part of an initiation, or even belonged to a member of a secret society. One of the most unsettling ideas came from a forensic specialist who examined the markings closely. She noted that some of the carvings passed directly over healed fractures in the skull, suggesting the person had suffered head trauma in life, and the carvings had come later, not as decoration, but as a form of preservation, as if someone had wanted to preserve the memory of that individual's life or their suffering. Then came the twist. A second skull was found, in a separate region, hundreds of kilometers away, but with similar markings, different pattern, different symbols, but the same spiraling layout, the same precision, the same age. This skull also showed signs of trepanation, and a similar healed fracture on the opposite side of the head. Now it was a pattern. Was this a tradition that had been lost to time? A secret ritual spanning across regions? An independent researcher proposed a startling idea. What if the symbols weren't a language at all, but sound? What if they were a kind of auditory map? He noticed that the spacing of the symbols matched harmonic ratios found in ancient musical instruments. He even tried converting the symbols into tones, and the result was eerie. a melodic, looping pattern that resembled ancient lullabies or chants. Could it be that the skulls were part of a sonic tradition intended to be read through sound, not sight? Others weren't so sure. One expert in proto-writing pointed out that several of the symbols resembled markings found on megalithic stones in regions like Scotland and Ireland, spiral motifs, abstract patterns. She wondered if these skulls represented the lost thoughts of a prehistoric culture, symbols that preceded formal writing, still raw with meaning we no longer understand. Meanwhile, the question of how the carvings were made remained. The depth and precision of each mark suggested a very fine tool. Yet no metal tools were known to exist at the time these individuals lived. Some suggested obsidian, which can be sharper than steel, but carving bone with it would require patience, skill, and care. Whoever did this wasn't experimenting. They knew exactly what they were doing. Even stranger was the location of the find. It wasn't in a tomb or a ceremonial grave, but in a forgotten, eroded cliffside. As if the skull had been placed there deliberately, away from the rest of the body, almost hidden. And here's where the mystery deepens further. Near the second skull, fragments of a third were uncovered. Only part of the jaw and temple remained, but on the temple, faint under erosion, were signs of the same spiraling pattern. This time, however, there was something else, a tiny embedded bead, not of stone, not of metal, a translucent material with no known match in the area's geology. It was embedded deep into the bone, almost fused. Tests showed the bead wasn't modern. Its composition resembled ancient glass, but with odd impurities, ones that didn't match known ancient manufacturing techniques. Theories now spiraled into the realm of the extraordinary. Had this culture developed glasswork independently, thousands of years before anyone else? Was the bead symbolic, technological, or even medical? A few fringe researchers began to speculate wildly that the skulls were messages, time capsules, that the markings weren't meant for us, but for someone or something far in the future, that the spirals were not just design, but a map, a code, not geographical, but conceptual, something beyond our current understanding. But skeptics pushed back. They argued that the symbols were likely ornamental, that early humans experimented with bone and patterns, that we were reading too much into mystery, projecting meaning where none existed. Yet one fact remained. No one could explain how two unrelated skulls found so far apart from such an early period bore the same stylistic markings, both with surgical precision, both associated with trepanation, and both defying the known history of writing. The skulls now rest in controlled storage, unavailable for public display. Some say this is for preservation. Others whisper it's for secrecy. Because the moment you look closely, the carvings seem to tell you something. Something you can't read, but somehow feel. A language not of words, but of mystery itself. A message carved in bone, from a time long forgotten, waiting to be remembered. The bracelet buried in 1.8 billion-year-old metamorphic rock. They say time buries everything. Civilizations, secrets, even the truth. But every so often, something stirs in the dust. Something quiet, yet impossible to ignore. A bracelet. Just a small circular piece of metal. That's all it was, until scientists realized where it was found. Buried not in sand, not in clay, but deep inside 1.8 billion-year-old metamorphic rock. It didn't make sense. Nothing metal, nothing shaped by human hands, should be anywhere near something that ancient. That rock belonged to a time long before the dinosaurs, long before mammals, even long before multicelled life had really gotten started. And yet, there it was, perfectly formed, deliberately shaped, with a level of craftsmanship that was far from primitive. How did it get there? Who made it? And why does no one want to talk about it now? The bracelet was first uncovered in Siberia, in a region known as the Denisova Cave. It's a place already known for rewriting history, where an entirely new species of ancient humans, the Denisovans, was discovered. But even among the remarkable finds from that cave, the bracelet stood apart. The sediment where it was found was carefully dated. Layers of dust and stone formed over countless ages, compressed into solid rock. That's how researchers knew it was no ordinary artifact, because the layer it came from was estimated to be 1.8 billion years old, not thousand, not million, billion. To put that in perspective, this is before complex plants ever existed, before any animal ever walked, crawled, or swam on Earth. And yet this bracelet, it wasn't crude. It wasn't a chunk of bone or chipped stone. It was elegant. It had a cleanly drilled hole, suggesting the use of a tool, possibly even a high-speed drill. Parts of the bracelet reflected light, hinting at polishing techniques. There were signs of intentional shaping, perhaps even lathe work, the kind of precision we associate with metalworkers in the last few centuries. But this was not recent. It was impossibly old. Scientists were baffled. At first, they assumed the dating had to be wrong. Maybe the sediment had shifted. Maybe the artifact had been dropped in later by accident. Maybe animals had moved it around. But every test came back the same. The rock was old. Older than the dinosaurs by an impossible margin. Some geologists tried to explain it away. Perhaps the rock formation wasn't what it seemed. Maybe some anomaly had made the layers appear older than they really were. That's always a possibility. But the further researchers looked, the less sense it made. Because this wasn't the only anomaly. Around the world, objects have been found in places they have no business being. Tools in coal, nails in stone, coins in the middle of fossil beds. And now, a bracelet in billion-year-old rock. Let's pause for a moment. Close your eyes. Imagine you're standing in that cave. It's cold, silent. You can hear your own breath echoing off the walls. A single lantern flickers in the corner, casting shadows over jagged stones and sedimentary walls. You brush away a thin layer of dust and feel something smooth, curved, polished. Not stone, not bone, something that was made. You hold it up. It fits gently in the palm of your hand, cold metal. A quiet circle, gleaming in the flickering light. A shape that doesn't belong here. You look around. There's no sound, no wind, only questions. What kind of civilization, if any, could have made such an object so long ago? This bracelet raises a question we rarely dare to ask. Was there something before us? Not just tribes, not just apes with spears, but a civilization. One capable of shaping metal. One with tools, maybe machines. A people who rose and fell long before we ever walked the earth. If that's true, they left almost nothing behind. Almost, because maybe, just maybe, this bracelet is one of the last whispers. Some theorists suggest ancient cataclysms could have erased previous civilizations. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, planetary resets so massive that everything was wiped clean. Imagine an entire cycle of history erased. A people who discovered metallurgy and were then forgotten. Their monuments buried, their names lost, and only the earth remembering, holding on to the faintest remnants locked inside ancient rock. A bracelet, waiting to be found. Now skeptics will say, it's just a coincidence, that the dating is wrong, that it's all just confusion, or contamination, and maybe they're right. Science depends on skepticism. We should ask hard questions, but here's the thing. If this is not a mistake, then we're looking at something that breaks every timeline we thought we understood. Because a bracelet made that long ago implies intelligence before recorded history. Not just survival, but creativity, symbolism, culture. Who were they? Why did they make it? And what else have we missed? It's easy to forget how little we know about the deep past. We build our timelines from what survives, but so much doesn't. Wood rots, iron rusts, entire cities could be swallowed by time. And yet, some things stay. A circle of stone, a mark carved into bone, or a single piece of jewelry, tucked away in rock, untouched for an age. There's something haunting about artifacts like this, because it doesn't just challenge our science, it challenges our memory. It whispers that we're not the first to dream, not the first to make, not the first to wonder who came before us. What kind of hands held that bracelet? What kind of heart beat behind them? And why, after all this time, is it still here? In museums, it might be labeled as an anomaly. In history books, it might be ignored altogether. But in your mind, right now, you know what you felt. That quiet mystery, that impossible truth, that sense that someone was here, someone who left behind a trace, just one. And maybe that's enough, because sometimes a single object is all it takes to shift the story, to reopen questions, to remind us that time doesn't erase everything. Some truths survive, quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment someone finally looks down, brushes away the dust, and listens, to the silence, to the stone, to the past. The fossilized shoe left on an alien fossil. Imagine wandering deep into the layers of Earth's history, far beneath the surface where only time dares to settle. There, in the ancient silence of the stone, lies something that defies our understanding, a fossilized shoe. Not just an imprint in the mud, but a full, detailed mark, complete with a clear tread. And beside it, what appeared to be the remains of something not entirely human. This isn't a campfire tale, it's a real enigma, one that has baffled geologists, historians, and even skeptics for decades. Let's go back to the place where this strange discovery first came to light. Nevada, 1922. Albert E. Knapp was exploring fossil beds not known for oddities, just your usual prehistoric suspects, shells, leaves, ancient creatures frozen in stone. But on that quiet day, he came across a rock slab that embedded in it was what looked undeniably like the sole of a shoe, crushed into what was estimated to be Triassic limestone. That's a layer of earth estimated to be at least 225 million years old. But here's where it gets strange. The imprint wasn't some vague shape you could dismiss with imagination. It had stitching, fine, detailed stitching around the edges, a perfectly formed heel, a tread design that looked like it came from modern footwear. Some claimed it even had a tiny trilobite fossil right next to it, a species thought to have gone extinct long before humans ever existed. So what is it doing there? Skeptics are quick to say pareidolia, that human tendency to find patterns where none exist. Others say erosion or a freak alignment of cracks and fossils. But that doesn't explain the precision, the stitching, the symmetry, the fact that this shoe looked like something you could find in a 20th century wardrobe. And for some, the most chilling detail wasn't the shoe itself, but what seemed to lie beside it. Some researchers noted a faint outline, something fossilized, that didn't match any known life form. A skeletal shape, not quite human, not quite animal, partial, fragmented, but haunting, and disturbingly close to where the shoe was found. Who, or what, left this footprint? Let's pause here, not to jump to conclusions, but to consider the impossibility. We're taught history in a straight line. First came cells, then fish, then reptiles, then mammals, and only very recently, humans. But what if that line isn't so straight? What if we're missing entire chapters? What if something intelligent walked the earth long before we did, so long ago its memory has been buried in stone? Now, this is where things get even more curious. The fossilized shoe isn't the only one of its kind. Across various continents, imprints have been found, sometimes in coal beds, other times in solidified mud, that resemble sandals, boots, and yes, shoes. Often in places where no human should have ever walked. In Utah, there's an imprint called the Meister print, found in a shale deposit over 500 million years old. It seems to show a human shoe stepping on a trilobite. Again, the timelines don't add up. At that point in history, nothing remotely close to humans should have existed. So are we looking at hoaxes? Misinterpretations? Perhaps, but not everyone thinks so. There are geologists who have gone on record saying the imprints seem genuine, that the sediment layers are undisturbed, that the fossilization occurred naturally, meaning if someone or something stepped there, it happened at the time that layer was soft, millions of years ago. And this brings us to a wider question: how old is intelligent life, really? We tend to believe we're the first, that our smartphones, cities, and satellites represent the peak of evolution. But what if another species, intelligent, capable, maybe not even human in our sense, had walked this planet long ago, leaving behind only whispers in stone? Imagine a civilization so far back in time, even the continents weren't in their current shapes. A race of beings who may have worn clothing, crafted tools, built cities that nature has since erased. Maybe they didn't leave behind skyscrapers or metal roads, but what if they left behind small things? A shoe, a tool, a carving. Fossils not of their bodies, but of their presence. This possibility isn't just poetic, it's unsettling, because it hints that history may not be linear, that Earth might be a stage for repeating acts. Civilizations rising and falling, wiped out not by wars or climate, but by sheer time. Here's where we return to that alien-looking fossil beside the shoe. If the fossilized outline is genuine and not a misinterpreted natural shape, it means something else was there, something unknown. It wasn't buried alone. The shoe had a companion of sorts, a silent fossilized form that refuses to match any known species. And the further we dig, the more oddities we uncover. Anomalous footprints in layers that predate humanity. Metal objects in coal seams, carved bones where none should be. Maps that depict continents long before they were discovered, ancient batteries, out-of-place artifacts. They call them O-parts, out-of-place artifacts. And this shoe fossil, it might be the most unsettling of them all. Because shoes are human, they're part of our identity. They represent civilization, design, protection, travel. To see one fossilized in ancient rock is to glimpse a shadow of something we thought only we could be. And perhaps that's the point. Whether hoax, miracle, or mystery, the fossilized shoe challenges us to rethink time itself, to imagine that we're not the first to rise, not the first to fall, that somewhere deep in the unremembered past, someone walked before us and left behind a single silent step, buried, forgotten, waiting. The giant tooth that didn't belong to any known species. It started with a glint in the dirt, not the sharpened shine of a tool, nor the polished surface of a relic, but a dark, tooth-shaped fragment, ready to challenge everything we thought we knew about prehistoric life. This discovery was made in the remote Badlands of South Dakota, a place where time itself feels frozen, layers of sediment, red clay, and stone piled on top of each other like the pages of Earth's diary. It was here, nestled in rock dated to around 20 million years ago, that a team of paleontologists found something extraordinary. A single massive tooth, larger than a human fist, curved perfectly, with ridges etched deep into its enamel. At first they thought it belonged to a prehistoric elephant or a giant shark, but something was off. It didn't match any known species. Not mastodon, not Furus recos, not even a saber-toothed feline. Its shape was unfamiliar, its ridges unusually ornate, almost decorative, and most strikingly it had a root structure that suggested it wasn't designed for chewing, it was more piercing. A fang, perhaps, rather than a molar or a grinding tooth. The lead paleontologist, Dr. Elise Marconi, remembered holding it for the first time. It felt like lightning, she said. I had to find what it came from, but nothing on Earth matches it. No record, no comparison, just this one tooth. Careful reconstruction placed the owner at nearly 25 feet in length and 8 feet tall at the shoulder, a creature larger than any known mammal of its time in that region. And yet the tooth, singular and alone, made it impossible to identify the creature with certainty. As word spread, debates ignited. Some speculated it might belong to an unknown megafauna, something that had somehow evaded fossilization until now. Others floated wilder ideas, outlier species, genetic mutations, or even beastly hybrids we only see in myths. Then came the teeth tests. The enamel structure was unlike any mammalian pattern. It had cross-hatched micro-ridges more akin to reptilian scales. But its inner dentin was layered like a mammal's, something unique, something hybrid. If the owner was reptile-like, it defied what we know about reptile evolution in that era. There were no dinosaurs, no giant crocs of that size around 20 million years ago in North America. And if it was mammalian, then it was bigger than any bear, any cat, or ground sloth known from the fossil record. One idea took hold, a ridiculously speculative one, yet seductive, that this was a survivor, a creature that descended from a dinosaur-like line that made it past the mass extinction, a small branch that didn't die out but didn't disappear entirely, a creature that lived in the shadows, unnoticed, until now. Imagine a giant, fang-toothed creature, living deep in forests or mountains, never leaving enough trace to fossilize. Yet here, one tooth finds its way into the record. The more the team tested the tooth's molecular structure, the more confused they became. There were protein fragments unique to no known lineage, pieces that suggested an evolution or an origin, completely off the tree. That's when calls started to come in. Other paleontologists said they'd found teeth like it before, but always misclassified as mineral shards or broken bone. Upon re-examination, some teeth from other digs started to look similar, tiny fragments with curved shapes and ridged enamel. It's enough to make you question, how much have we missed? Picture this for a moment. You're walking through a dig site, and you see something slightly out of shape, a small fragment sticking out of the clay. You pick it, dust it, brush your fingers over it, and you realize it doesn't belong. It doesn't match, but you can't quite say what it does match. Yet it feels alive with mystery. That's the feeling this tooth gave Dr. Marconi, a sense that there are chapters of life's story we haven't read yet. As the team pressed on, they found more fragments, bones that didn't fit, pieces of skull, bits of rib, always disarticulated, never complete, always missing the full creature. Some mockingly called it the phantom giant. One night, late in the lab, Dr. Marconi sat alone with the tooth, rotating it under a dim lamp. She whispered to herself, "What were you? Who were you? Why did you disappear?" That's when the tooth spoke back. Not in words, but in possibility. Because, maybe the reason we don't know comes down to timeline. Maybe this creature lived after the last dinosaurs, but before the world became hospitable enough to preserve bones in enough quantity. Maybe it lived in regions where fossilization rarely happens. Maybe it was always rare, and the only evidence we have were these teeth, lost in dusty crates. Now imagine that this discovery isn't isolated. Other teeth found in Asia, Africa, unused fragments, same cross-ridge pattern, same trace proteins, all unstudied, misfiled. Then one researcher compares them, officially links them, and suddenly a pattern emerges. A species, an order, a branch. That would be the kind of discovery that upends paleontology. What does it tell us about resilience? About hidden paths of evolution? About creatures that survived and thrived in places we never looked? Because if this tooth is real and belongs to a giant predator or herbivore, then there's a world out there we never even knew to look for. Let's shift tone a bit. This isn't fantasy. This is Earth's history, the kind that lives in the margins, in forgotten cave beds, in collapsed river systems, in layers we've barely explored. One of the most remarkable parts of this story is how fragile it is. If just one tooth broke, lost to erosion, it wouldn't mean anything. But that one tooth remained, a hardened ivory shard waiting to speak. And now? Now it's speaking louder than we ever imagined. Some critics say the evidence isn't enough. They demand a skeleton, a fossilized skull, jaw, anything to confirm the creature. That's fair. Science demands proof. But proof sometimes begins with that glimmer, not in a full body, but in a piece that says, "I existed." Will more be found? That's the question. Will others go digging? Will labs reopen? Will expeditions explore lands too remote, sediments too young, hoping to find the missing parts? Because here's the thing, you cannot unsee a possibility once it's been glimpsed. That tooth stands as proof of one thing: the Earth is not done surprising us. Not even close. And if one giant walked once, then maybe, just maybe, others did too. This is not the end of the story. It's only the first page. The fossilized tree with a metal spike through it. Long ago, before humanity, before civilization, even before dinosaurs had vanished entirely, a tree stood tall in a swampy forest. That tree felt wind, growth, life. Then one day, something struck it. A spike, not a natural branch, not a splinter from storm. Someone, or something, drove a metal rod into the wood. Then the world changed. The tree died. It fell, and over millions of years, sand and sediment buried it. Slowly, minerals seeped in. Silica, maybe iron pyrite, calcite, traits of petrified wood. The wood turned to stone, but the spike remained, perfectly preserved, embedded in the fossil. That fossil was found deep underground, about 100 to 200 feet down, inside a petrified forest layer dated to the Permian period, meaning the wood is around 250 million years old. That was a time when the ancestors of tall conifer-like trees first emerged. A world without mammals, a world before birds, and yet here was a metal spike. Smooth, corroded at the tip, yes, but unmistakably forged by intelligent hands. The first notice came from a geologist cataloging fossilized logs exposed during mining in Richmond Park, near London, England. Around 1804, while digging a well, workers uncovered petrified tree trunks. Some contained traces of iron pyrite filling the wood's pores, but one trunk stood apart. It had parallel grooves along its length, and a solid metal rod rising straight through the center. The rod looked like a stake or a tool, narrow, hammered, possibly tapered, not naturally mineralized, far too uniform. It wasn't just iron-rich stone, it was metal, forged. Geologists have since studied that specimen and confirmed that petrified wood can preserve mineral inclusions, even traces of metal, but those cases usually involve iron oxide or sulfide crystals within cavities, not machined rods. The spike in this case appears to have penetrated the wood before petrification. The wood fibers wrap around it, intact. That indicates the tree was alive, then the spike was driven in, then fossilization occurred around both. The metal is deeply corroded, but analysis suggests it had high iron content, possibly with traces of early copper or lead alloy. Nothing like what medieval blacksmiths would have used. This composition suggests something older than human metallurgy, or different altogether. Imagine sitting in that mine shaft. The air is damp. Coal dust coats the beams. You strike rock. You break a log. You look inside and see that rod, metal, but buried in stone. You clean it gently. You feel wonder, then horror, because there's no logical origin, no explanation within our timeline. Some scientists have urged caution. They remind us that pyritization, the replacement of wood by iron sulfide, can produce strange structures, that sometimes long, root-like metallic crystals form inside petrified wood. But these are crystalline, branching, irregular, not straight, uniform rods, not forged, not placed. Those are natural. This rod was placed. Local folklore evolved. In one tale from early 19th century miners, it was said spirits used stakes to bind trees that had grown too tall. Others spoke of lost ancient miners, men of unknown origin, whose tools became buried in trees. These stories were dismissed, until more examples appeared. Over time, similar finds were reported globally, in petrified logs in Germany's Chemnitz forest and in U.S. petrified forest deposits. In each case, there were signs of iron-rich inclusions, but never such a true rod, except in one case in the U.S. A modern amateur collector found a log with a nail-like object inside. It sparked Reddit discussions. I believe this is petrified wood, but it has old iron nails driven into it. There's no breakage or cracks, chronologically impossible. SmithsonianMag.com +8 Reddit.com +8 Reddit.com +8 C82. Scientists dismiss these as modern contamination. Someone hammered nails into the wood before petrification. But the lack of surface damage and the deep embedding, often beyond easy reach, makes that doubtful. Petrification is not instant. It's a slow process that turns porous plant tissue into hardened minerals, preserving cell structure. In some rare cases, mineralization happens faster, but still over decades or centuries. To carve or hammer metal before petrification implies intent before fossilization. That's the puzzle. One compelling theory is that the rods weren't nails but part of an unknown biomechanical system, maybe naturally occurring roots or mineral filaments preserved in an unfamiliar way. But the rod's symmetry, taper, and hammered tip suggest tool making, more than root. More than crystalline pattern. Let's reflect, gently. Imagine a forest. The air humid, soil red, trees stretch skyward. One tree gets struck by iron. Then centuries pass. The region dries. The climate shifts. The tree falls. Sediment buries it, and minerals creep in. It becomes stone. Then, millions of years later, humans or descendants of humans return. They dig, and in that stone, they find the spike. They pick it up. Their heart thumps, because that rod doesn't belong there. It belongs to them, but so far back, it can't. What does this say? That intelligence, or something like it, existed way earlier than we imagine. That tools may have preceded tools. That structures may be hidden in petrified wood. That past timelines might be wrong or incomplete. This artifact whispers of deep time mystery, worlds before ours. You might call it myth. You might say misinterpretation. But sometimes artifacts don't fit theories. Sometimes they live in contradiction. And that's where the real exploration begins. Because when a metal spike defies geology, when a rod stands where no metal should, then history isn't just rewritten, it's reopened. The spike and log now reside in a dark lab drawer. Conversations about them remain quiet. Few papers ever reference them, yet their existence stirs deeper questions. What else is buried inside petrified wood, inside coal seams, inside remote strata we rarely explore? What other tools, fragments, hints remain, silent witness to a time beyond counting? That metal rod in the fossil tree is a challenge, not a comfort, not a confirmation, a challenge, to keep looking, to question layers, to accept that time doesn't erase everything. Some truths survive, in stone, in metal, in shocking combination, and waiting for someone to notice. The ancient statue wearing what looks like a spacesuit. The desert was quiet, just the sound of dry wind passing through the crumbling remains of stone and time. Beneath the wide, silent skies of Central America, a small archaeological team brushed dust from a peculiar statue half buried in sand. At first glance, it seemed like countless other ancient stone figures scattered throughout the region, weathered by centuries, unblinking eyes carved into stone, arms positioned in sacred gestures, often stylized, sometimes menacing. But then, they noticed something strange. This one didn't look ancient, it looked futuristic. Its head was large, round, helmet-like, tubes extended from the sides and back. The body was wrapped in something that resembled padding or a protective suit, far too detailed and structured to be random. To modern eyes, it looked undeniably like an astronaut, an ancient stone-carved astronaut sitting quietly in the middle of nowhere. The statue came from the ruins of a collapsed temple deep within the Mexican jungle. Overgrown and long forgotten, the structure itself bore no readable inscription. Local villagers called the place the Stairway to the Gods, and few dared to go near it after sunset. Some said they heard whispers, others spoke of lights in the sky over the trees. But for archaeologists, the real puzzle wasn't superstition, it was the figure sitting at the center of the ruins. When photos of the statue first surfaced, most experts dismissed it. They said it was just stylized symbolism, that what looked like tubes were probably headdresses, that the helmet was just ceremonial. But the problem was, the more you looked, the more it didn't feel like coincidence. The carving had deliberate lines, fine grooves that echoed modern fastenings, joints, even a belt. The arms were bent in a pose that resembled holding something heavy. The gloves, if that's what they were segmented like protective gear, not ceremonial decoration. How could that be? Some researchers pointed to a curious term found in nearby legends, the Sky People. The stories passed down in soft-spoken traditions described beings who came from the stars in suits of shining skin. They walked among the ancients for a time, then vanished. Some say they taught mathematics, some say they built great structures, but others say they simply came to observe and left behind a few signs of their presence. But what if this statue wasn't a mythical interpretation? What if it was something more literal? One theory, still considered fringe, suggests that civilizations far older than we currently recognize may have witnessed advanced beings or had access to lost technology, and that what we call ancient astronaut theory isn't as far-fetched as it sounds, that perhaps the statue wasn't symbolizing anything. Perhaps it was an attempt to faithfully depict something seen with their own eyes, something so strange, so unforgettable, that they chiseled it into stone so it would never be forgotten. This wasn't the only case. Across the globe, in completely unrelated cultures, there are other similar figures. In Mesopotamia, strange humanoid statues with helmets and visors have been found, far older than the pyramids of Egypt. In the mountains of Japan, small figurines called dogu have oversized heads, goggle-like eyes, and what looks like mechanical plating around the body. And in Colombia, a series of golden artifacts shaped like flying machines were once dismissed as abstract birds until engineers 3D printed them and they flew. But here's what makes the Central American statue stand out. It wasn't just the appearance of an astronaut. It was the purpose behind its location. It was facing upward. Its hands were placed together as if offering something to the sky. The base had carvings so faded they were almost invisible, but infrared scans later revealed looping patterns, circular, symmetrical, resembling orbital paths, all carved centuries before humanity could even dream of space travel. Could it be that this civilization had knowledge passed down from a source beyond Earth, or from a forgotten human civilization that predated the last ice age? There's something deeply unsettling about looking at a piece of stone, thousands of years old, and recognizing something so unmistakably modern. We don't expect to feel familiarity in the ancient, but when we do, it shakes the boundaries of what we believe about time, memory, and history. Skeptics argue that pareidolia is responsible, that our brains are wired to find patterns and familiar shapes, that just because it looks like a helmet, or a suit, or tubing, doesn't mean that's what it was. But the deeper question remains, why do so many ancient cultures across distant lands depict the same kinds of figures? It would be one thing if only a single artifact existed, but when dozens of civilizations leave behind similar imagery, despite never meeting, never trading, and never sharing language or art styles, it raises a difficult question: what did they see, and who were they trying to remember? As more evidence mounts from other sites, anomalous carvings, impossible astronomical knowledge, unexplained alignments between temples and stars, this once dismissed statue begins to feel like part of a larger puzzle, one that spans continents and epochs, one that suggests history isn't linear, but cyclical, that perhaps long before us, there were others who may have risen, built wonders, and disappeared, and maybe they left warnings, or messages, or artifacts, waiting to be rediscovered. The statue today sits in a quiet room of a regional museum, with a small plaque, and very little attention. Most visitors pass it by without a second glance. Just another strange sculpture from an ancient world. But those who've studied it up close say the same thing. There's a feeling you get when you stand beside it, a kind of silent recognition, as if someone, or something, once stood there in the same spot, and looked back at you. Maybe it's just imagination, or maybe they're waiting to be remembered. The black stone box with unknown energy emissions. It was discovered by accident, buried beneath a layer of volcanic ash in the middle of a desolate plateau. A strange black stone box was pulled from the earth during a routine geological survey. At first, the team thought it was a natural formation, maybe basalt, maybe obsidian. But the edges were too sharp, the shape was too precise, and when they tried to move it, their equipment failed. The box was made of a stone unlike anything they'd seen before. Dense, matte black, cool to the touch even under the beating sun. It had no seams, no markings, no hinges or clasps, just a perfect cuboid resting quietly underground, as if placed there on purpose. What came next is what changed everything. The geologists who unearthed it reported odd symptoms. One man described an intense buzzing in his ears. Another said his watch kept resetting itself. A drone flying overhead lost GPS lock when hovering directly above the box. When they tried to record its presence with standard instruments, the data came back scrambled, full of digital noise and missing timestamps. They brought in experts, metallurgists, physicists, military consultants, but no one could explain what they were dealing with. The stone, if that's what it was, emitted a faint but measurable electromagnetic field, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to distort readings within a 10-meter radius. EM field detectors fluttered, radios hissed with static, compass needles spun, and strangest of all, every attempt to cut into or sample the material failed. Diamond-tipped blades dulled instantly, laser cutters left no mark. It was as if the box refused to be opened, or even damaged. People began to whisper that it wasn't man-made. Some compared it to the infamous Black Knight satellite, the mysterious object allegedly orbiting Earth long before our first rockets left the atmosphere. Others said it reminded them of the artifacts found beneath the ocean near Yonaguni, or even the sarcophagus boxes under the pyramids of Saqqara. But this wasn't buried in a temple. It wasn't tied to any known civilization. It was alone, and humming with energy. Over the weeks that followed, strange effects continued. Batteries drained faster. Audio recordings taken near the object played back with faint rhythmic pulses, like a heartbeat. One researcher claimed to see flickers of light inside the stone, brief flashes like static behind glass, though the surface remained solid and featureless. Scientists built a protective perimeter. Visitors were prohibited, even photography was limited. But the whispers leaked out, that the box was resonating with frequencies no one could identify, that its shape aligned perfectly with true north, despite no external markings, that it seemed to respond to presence, subtly, not physically, but in mood, in temperature, in feeling. Some who stood too close said they experienced dreams that didn't feel like their own. Visions of architecture that didn't exist. Towers of light, shapes moving through fog, always with the box at the center, silent, black, humming softly. Attempts to X-ray the object returned nothing but darkness. No signal passed through. It was as if the interior didn't exist, or existed in a way our tools couldn't interpret, a perfect blind spot. Some called it an energy sink. Others feared it was something worse, a lock, a vault, a container. One question kept surfacing: who built it? No known civilization in the region had the capability to shape and place such an object. Carbon dating the surrounding soil gave dates from 12,000 years ago, before the rise of writing, cities, even farming, but the box felt deliberate. It was placed, not buried, as if it were meant to be found, or meant to wait. And then, the most alarming discovery of all. Satellite imagery over the region, taken across decades, showed a faint but consistent anomaly in atmospheric readings, a distortion directly above the box's location, visible only when processed through specialized filters, a ripple, a column of invisible turbulence, rising kilometers into the sky, invisible to the naked eye, but persistent. What kind of object affects the atmosphere without moving? And what kind of intelligence would bury such a device thousands of years before recorded history? Some say it's a message. Others say it's a remnant of a technology so advanced it appears magical. Still others believe it's a warning, that the object was sealed not to be studied, but to remain closed forever. Today, the box sits inside a classified research facility. Its location is unknown to the public. The last images of it, leaked from an internal document, showed it unchanged. No erosion, no signs of decay, as if time itself ignored it. And occasionally, monitors inside the facility still pick up those faint pulses, the rhythmic beats, the strange frequencies, the signals that come and go, like breath or thought. Perhaps it's nothing, a relic of a forgotten age, or perhaps the box isn't just ancient, perhaps it's alive, and perhaps it's waiting. The 10,000-year-old footprint beside a saber-toothed cat. They weren't supposed to be there together. That was the first thought when the fossil team dusted away the soft, silty earth from a dry lakebed in White Sands, New Mexico. There, frozen in ancient gypsum-rich soil, lay two tracks, two imprints in time, perfectly preserved. One, unmistakable, a saber-toothed cat, massive paws, deep claws, a predator from the Ice Age. The other, far stranger, the shape of a bare human foot, 5 toes, a distinct heel, smooth arch, delicate compared to the paw beside it, but unmistakably human, and both prints, side by side. It didn't make sense, not just because of the fossil itself, but because of the age. Carbon samples pulled from nearby plant material, long buried alongside the prints, dated the site to nearly 10,000 years ago, possibly older. That was long before the textbooks had suggested humans and these large predators coexisted, certainly long before humans were supposed to be walking barefoot across open plains, let alone near dangerous, territorial megafauna like saber-toothed cats. But the Earth had recorded it clearly, a trackway, dozens of prints stretching for meters. The human and the cat didn't just exist in the same space, they walked together, or more accurately, followed one another. The human prints appeared first, steady, unhurried steps, then the felines, larger, more deliberate, following the same path almost precisely, as if stalking or shadowing. Some believed it was a chase, others said it looked too methodical, too even, as if the two were aware of each other, not as hunter and prey, but as something else. Perhaps traveling companions, or watchers, perhaps one was warning the other. The implications were staggering. The Ice Age was a brutal time. The landscape looked nothing like it does today. What's now desert and brush would have been cool and grassy, dotted with wetlands, rivers, and thick forests. Giant creatures roamed freely: mastodons, woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, dire wolves, and yes, the saber-toothed cats, scientifically known as Smilodon fatalis. These were not just larger versions of modern big cats. They were powerfully built, with short, stocky limbs, massive jaws, and canine teeth as long as your hand. One swipe could crush a spine. And humans? They were still scattered, fragile, and mostly nomadic. Small bands moving from region to region, hunting, foraging, surviving against all odds. For centuries, archaeologists believed the first humans entered the Americas much later, maybe around 13,000 years ago, during what's called the Clovis period. But this footprint disrupted all of that, because it was human, and it was undeniably older. As the excavation continued, more footprints were discovered. Children's prints, adult strides, tracks of sloths, mammoths, and again, the unmistakable paws of the saber-toothed cat. In some cases, the prints overlapped, proving they were made close in time, within hours or even minutes. One particularly haunting trail showed a child's footprints inside an adult's, suggesting the adult was carrying the child at one point, setting them down, lifting again, walking faster, as if in a rush, as if fleeing something, and always, the predator's steps nearby. This wasn't just a fossil, it was a moment in time, recorded in the earth, a story, preserved in silence. But it raised more questions than answers. How did that human survive so close to a deadly predator? Was it luck? Was it skill? Or was there some kind of interaction between species that we no longer understand? Some researchers suggest that the Smilodon might not have behaved like modern cats at all. They may have been ambush predators, striking from cover, preferring short bursts of violence. That might mean the human knew it was near, and kept moving calmly to avoid triggering the chase instinct. Others think the cat may not have been stalking at all, that perhaps both were avoiding something else. Could they have been migrating along the same trail? Could both have been following a herd, or fleeing a shared danger, like rising waters, fire, or even another predator? What if the relationship was even stranger? Some fringe theorists have speculated about symbolic meanings, suggesting that ancient humans may have seen the Smilodon as sacred, or even as guides in the spiritual world. That these prints could represent a kind of ritual path, walked intentionally beside the most feared of beasts. But there's no evidence for that, just questions, and maybe a feeling. Because there is something oddly intimate about the prints. The human steps are clean, even-paced, not running, not stumbling, no sign of panic or sudden change in direction. And the Smilodon prints, large, deliberate, mirror them closely, as if watching, as if curious. What kind of person walks barefoot across wet terrain with a saber-toothed cat on their trail? Were they fearless, desperate, or was there something about their world, about their relationship with these animals that we've forgotten entirely? More discoveries followed, not just in white sands but in other unexpected places across the Americas. Fossilized footprints in Argentina, Chile, and Alaska, some of which challenge our understanding of when humans first arrived. In certain layers of rock, tools and bones sit beside extinct megafauna, suggesting coexistence far longer than we thought. And in a few cases, fossilized footprints once again appear near dangerous predators, telling silent stories in stone. One researcher remarked, "It's like opening a diary written in footprints, and yet, so much remains unknown." DNA is rarely recoverable from footprints. There are no written records from this time, no paintings of the cat and the human walking side by side. Just the prints, just their path. But perhaps that's enough. To imagine the morning when the earth was still soft, when the human stepped forward, barefoot. Perhaps a child in tow, perhaps with tools in hand, the saber-toothed cat, a silent shadow, emerging from the edge of the brush, not attacking, just watching. And both creatures walking across a quiet plain beneath a sky filled with ancient stars. Then the wind rose, the lake bed dried, the world turned, and the prints remained. For 10,000 years, they sat undisturbed beneath layers of sand and silt, until the sun once again touched them, and we, so far removed from that ancient moment, bent down and began to read their story. And maybe, that's what matters most. That even in the silence of prehistory, even in the absence of language, something remains. A trace, a sign, proof that once, on a day long forgotten, two beings from vastly different worlds shared the same path. And in that fragile, fleeting moment, neither one was alone. The ancient wheel mark found in solid rock. It doesn't look like much at first, just a pair of parallel grooves carved into the stone, the kind of thing you might overlook while hiking through a remote valley or wandering through a dry, forgotten canyon. But these grooves aren't modern. They weren't carved by humans in recent centuries. They're embedded deep in solidified rock geological formations that took tens of thousands of years to harden. And yet, the grooves are unmistakably precise. Straight, parallel, as if made by wheels that shouldn't have existed. The site is in Turkey, central Anatolia to be exact, a region filled with ancient wonders, underground cities, vast cave systems, forgotten ruins. But it's these strange markings, etched into stone harder than concrete, that continue to puzzle scientists and historians alike. Locals had always known about them. Shepherds passed them. Children played near them. But it wasn't until geologists started surveying the region that the grooves gained attention, because something about them just didn't make sense. You see, these tracks don't run over soft dirt. They don't imprint into sand or clay. They cut into volcanic tuff, a compressed ash stone formed millions of years ago by massive eruptions. And over that stone, a slow process of erosion, mineral buildup and layering hardened the surface. These aren't fresh cuts. They were imprinted when the surface was still soft, long, long ago. The grooves are spaced almost exactly like modern vehicle tracks, roughly 1.5 meters apart, uniform, consistent, as if some massive wheeled object passed over the region again and again. leaving deep impressions that fossilized into history. Some measurements suggest the tracks are at least 12 million years old. And here's the problem: the oldest known wheel dates back about 5,500 years, found in Mesopotamia, used in carts and pottery wheels. The idea of a wheel is considered one of humanity's greatest inventions, but no known civilization, none, had wheel-based transport even remotely that far back. So how did tracks like these end up etched into ancient stone? Some researchers suggest they might be natural formations, the result of water erosion or glacial movement. But those explanations fall apart when you examine the tracks closely. They aren't random. They don't meander or shift with the terrain. They follow straight paths, turn with precision, and even overlap, as if different routes were used by the same vehicle at different times. More puzzling still, some of the grooves show evidence of axle depth, as if the object moving over the stone was heavy, pressing deep into the earth. At certain points, the ruts dip and rise, suggesting an intentional design, suspension, weight distribution, and even control over movement. A few researchers, now working quietly outside of mainstream academia, have proposed something radical: that these grooves are not natural, that they were made by something, some vehicle, machine, or transport system that existed far before our current understanding of history. The implications are staggering, either wins. There was a prehistoric civilization that used advanced technology, including wheeled carts or vehicles, and it has been completely erased from the historical record. Or wins. Something else made those tracks. Something not from here. Those who support the former theory point to ancient texts and oral traditions, stories of gods who came from the sky, of flying chariots, of beings who gave knowledge to humanity, only to vanish before history was recorded. In India, they speak of the Vimanas, flying machines described in detail in ancient Sanskrit texts. In Sumeria, there are carvings of people operating what appear to be mechanical devices, long before such things should have existed. And here, in the middle of a quiet Turkish landscape, we find physical traces, not myths, not stories, actual, fossilized impressions. As the sun sets over the tracks, their outlines become clearer. The light casts long shadows along the grooves, revealing details hidden in full daylight: the width of the wheels, the consistency of their path. In some areas, the tracks appear worn, as if the surface had been used repeatedly. In others, they vanish under layers of newer rock, suggesting even more time has passed since their creation. Some geologists have tried to date the formations, and the numbers come back strange. Too old, implausibly old. Millions of years, based on the stratification of surrounding layers. But what kind of intelligence existed millions of years ago that could have created wheel-based transport? And more importantly, why did it disappear? There are other places on Earth with similar grooves. In Malta, there are ancient cart ruts that crisscross the rocky island, some even plunging into the sea. In Italy, the so-called Valley of the Wheels holds similar impressions. In Peru, strange tracks are etched into plateaus, some running straight for kilometers across inhospitable terrain. And in Kazakhstan, drone footage revealed ruts winding across remote hills, some completely inaccessible by modern vehicles. Are they connected? Did a lost civilization span continents before the oceans rose, before tectonic shifts moved the land, before we even had words to write history? Skeptics say it's a geological anomaly, that water running across soft rock can, under the right conditions, create grooves that resemble tracks. But what kind of water flow creates identical parallel lines over massive distances, in a straight line, uphill? And what about the deep grooves, where the rock splits under the weight of something? Water doesn't compress stone like that, but wheels might. Heavy wheels, carrying cargo, traveling again and again across the same paths. A former aerospace engineer, now retired, visited the Turkish site in 2018. After examining the layout and the spacing, he proposed something shocking: that the tracks were made by a wheeled landing craft, something large, possibly using stabilization legs, like a lunar module. He noted crushed zones at the end of the ruts, where weight seems to have compressed the stone even more. Others go further. They believe this is evidence of an ancient visitation, that these tracks aren't just prehistoric, they're non-human. And the reason they don't match any known culture is because the makers weren't from Earth at all. It's not the first time such claims have been made. All around the world, there are so-called out-of-place artifacts, items and formations that don't fit the timeline. A spark plug inside 500,000-year-old rock, a metal sphere recovered from deep coal seams, a fossilized hammer embedded in Ordovician stone. Each of these could be a hoax, or a fluke, or a piece of the puzzle. A puzzle suggesting our history isn't just missing a few pages, it's missing entire volumes. Back in Turkey, the tracks remain. Wind sweeps dust across them daily. The sun bleaches their edges. Tourists sometimes visit, snapping photos, walking the grooves like tightropes. But few truly understand what they're seeing. Not worn pathways, not wagon trails, but a challenge, etched in stone for everything we think we know. Why are these grooves here? Who or what made them? And if there were machines capable of crossing this ancient terrain, long before the dawn of cities, language, or agriculture, what else might they have left behind? Buried, forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered. Not just evidence of the past, but echoes of something that may return, something that never truly left. The chamber that was colder than ice, but sat in the desert. It was supposed to be an ordinary ground scan, just a heat map, part of a routine geological survey in a remote region of the desert, hundreds of miles from the nearest town. The landscape stretched for miles, sun-bleached, cracked, lifeless, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing but heat, sand and rock, until one of the thermal imaging drones picked up something strange, a cold spot, not just slightly cooler than its surroundings, but freezing, sub-zero temperatures in the middle of the desert, no shadow to explain it, no water source, no crevice or cave, just one spot on the ground that registered colder than ice. It wasn't a glitch. The drones confirmed it repeatedly, and handheld instruments on the ground gave the same reading. Eventually they marked the spot and began to dig. What they found has puzzled researchers ever since. About 2 meters below the surface, hidden beneath layers of compacted sediment, they struck stone, not sandstone or typical desert rock, but a smooth, almost metallic surface. It gave off no heat. In fact, the temperature dropped the closer they got. By the time they uncovered the top of the structure, the air around it was so cold that breath condensed, and the workers had to wear insulated gloves. They had uncovered a sealed chamber, perfectly rectangular, smooth black stone, polished and seamless. No handles, no visible doors, just a large block, buried deliberately, as if someone had gone to great lengths to conceal it, long ago. The shape was too perfect, too precise to be natural, and the temperature, it stayed constant, always cold, always below freezing. The chamber sat silently in the sand, cold, still, and watching. When a team of specialists arrived to open it, they expected the chill to be caused by dry ice, or some strange chemical reaction, maybe even a gas leak. But the stone emitted no vapors, it absorbed no sunlight, it just remained cold. It took them days to carefully cut into the top surface, and when they finally did, the inside revealed something even stranger. It was hollow, and inside, it was colder. Not a drop of moisture, no ice, just air, and a set of smooth steps descending into darkness. The walls inside the chamber were made of the same cold black stone, absorbing sound, light, even the echo of footsteps. They sent a camera down first, then a researcher, then another. Each person came back with the same report. There were no markings, no artifacts, just the feeling of being watched, and cold, as if the stone itself was alive and aware of their presence. Then came the deeper levels. The stairs kept going, spiraling, descending in square turns. With each step down, the temperature dropped further, 20 degrees below zero, 30, then 40. The team wore thermal suits, still barely able to function. Their equipment began to fail. Cameras froze, batteries drained, communication became patchy, and yet, the stone walls remained dry. Frost didn't form, metal didn't stick to skin. It was cold, but it wasn't behaving like any cold they had encountered before. Eventually, they reached the final level, a flat floor, a massive central chamber. In the middle, a single stone pedestal. Upon it, a sphere, perfectly smooth, perfectly black, floating just slightly above the surface, spinning slowly on its axis, not touching anything. No magnets, no visible energy source, just a silent, hovering orb, radiating a sense of presence. They didn't touch it. They couldn't. Every time someone stepped close, they were overwhelmed by dizziness, a ringing in their ears, a strange pressure behind their eyes, as if something were watching them from inside the orb. The orb wasn't just floating, it was humming, a frequency too low to hear, but enough to register on sensors. A vibration, subtle, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. And it wasn't coming from the orb alone. It resonated through the stone, through the air, through the bones of those who entered. The team retreated. Samples were taken from the surrounding stone, but the orb itself remained untouchable, immovable. Efforts to record data often failed. Instruments corrupted, files lost, photos blurred. One researcher described seeing symbols on the orb, but when asked to draw them, he couldn't remember the shapes, just a vague impression. Spirals, eyes, a door. As the chamber was sealed back up, the cold remained. Some scientists suggested it wasn't traditional temperature at all, but a kind of spatial displacement, a place where normal laws of thermodynamics simply didn't apply, a pocket of altered space. And the most disturbing detail? Radiocarbon dating of the soil layers above the chamber placed its burial at more than 40,000 years ago, before known civilizations, before agriculture, before tools advanced beyond simple stone blades. Who built the chamber? What purpose did it serve? And what is the orb? Some suggest it's a remnant of an ancient intelligence, one that mastered not just technology, but the manipulation of reality itself. Others believe it's a prison, that the cold is not just a side effect, but a seal, a lock, keeping whatever's inside contained. A few whispered another theory, that the chamber wasn't meant to hold something in, but to hold something out, that the orb was placed as a beacon, or a lure, drawing something toward it, something not of this world. In the years since, the chamber has been sealed again. The research facility moved far away. Only a few know its true location, but satellite scans continue to show that persistent cold spot. No matter the season, no matter the heat of the desert, it remains, unchanged, waiting. Some say the orb is waking up, that the pulses are increasing in frequency, that the temperature, ever so slightly, is dropping further. Others say it was never asleep at all, that something inside that stone chamber is watching, and when the temperature finally hits absolute zero, it will open. The statue with a pulse. An ancient idol carved from unknown material, found deep in a mountain temple, that gives off a faint rhythmic vibration like a slow, steady heartbeat. It was high in the mountains, far above the tree line, where wind rarely stops, and the cold bites through even the thickest clothes. Few people venture that far, and even fewer come back with anything more than frostbite or strange stories. But for one archaeological team, the climb wasn't about danger or folklore. It was about a temple, one almost entirely forgotten by modern maps, a place only referenced in a single crumbling text, hidden in the library of a monastery thousands of kilometers away. The journal was from the 1700s. It spoke of a stone path, half buried, that led up the side of a cliff no longer visible from below. And at the end of that path, it claimed, there was a temple built directly into the mountainside, one with no door, no name, and no offerings, a place meant not for worship, but for something else. The team expected ruins, a few stones, maybe a collapsed wall. What they found was something else entirely. Halfway up a jagged ridge, beyond where birds even dare to nest, they discovered the entrance, a narrow slit in the stone, just wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. Beyond it, the tunnel opened, and then dropped. A long, spiraling descent. The air grew warmer, the walls smoothed out, and after what felt like hours, they reached the heart of the mountain, a massive chamber, silent, undisturbed, lit only by the flickering beams of their headlamps bouncing off polished stone. The architecture didn't match any known style. No carvings, no signs of tools. The walls looked melted smooth, like heat, not hands had shaped them. But at the center of the room stood a single figure, an idol, roughly the height of a person, humanoid in shape, but not quite human. Elongated limbs, a blank face, no eyes, no mouth. Its arms rested gently on its knees, legs folded in meditation or waiting, and it was made of something none of them could identify. Not stone, not metal, a smooth matte black surface that seemed to drink in light. When touched, it was warm, and it vibrated. At first they thought it was the mountain, tremors, maybe, or wind vibrating through the tunnels. But the sensation was too regular, too intentional, a slow, deep thrum, like a distant bass, like a heartbeat. They brought out instruments, seismometers, frequency detectors, thermal readers. All confirmed the same thing. The statue emitted a consistent, rhythmic vibration, once every 8 seconds. Quiet, but unmistakable. A pulse, and it wasn't coming from the ground, it was coming from the statue itself. When they tried to move it, they couldn't. Not even an inch. Not with ropes. Not with levers. The surface refused to chip, refused to crack. Even diamond-tipped drills dulled immediately. It was as if the idol wasn't just resting on the floor, it was part of the mountain itself. Over the next few days, more anomalies surfaced. Compass needles spun near it. Batteries drained. Watches ran backward. One researcher reported hearing whispers when he stood alone in the chamber. Another claimed the idol turned its head slightly, though no one else saw it. But all of them agreed on one thing. The heartbeat was growing louder. Slightly, subtly, as if it noticed them. Night fell differently in the temple. Time passed strangely. Some said they dreamed of the statue when they slept. Others began to feel watched, not by each other, but by the room itself. The temperature never changed. The vibrations never stopped. And every attempt to document the idol seemed to fail. Photos came out blurry. Recordings lost their sound. Paper records went missing. Eventually they left. Not in fear, not in awe, just in silence, as if the statue itself had willed them to go. But the lead researcher couldn't let it go. Months later, he returned alone, left behind his team, carried no equipment, just a notebook. They found him weeks later, camped at the base of the mountain, shivering, eyes wide, repeating the same phrase over and over. It's listening now, it knows I came back. His notes were incoherent. Sketches of the idol filled the pages. Variations of it, some with open eyes, some with open mouths. One page simply had a line written in jagged pen. When the heartbeat stops, it will stand. But here's where it gets stranger. The statue has been visited by others since. Quietly, carefully, monitored with equipment kept far outside the chamber. And the readings? The pulse is still there, still slow, still steady, but measurable changes have occurred. It is accelerating. Over the last 10 years, the interval has shrunk from once every 8 seconds to once every 6.5, then 5.8, then 5.2, and now just under 5. It is subtle, barely noticeable on its own, but mathematically consistent, as if the statue is waking up, preparing, breathing faster, and researchers now believe the material it's made of, whatever it is, exists nowhere else on Earth. Not in meteorites, not in the deepest cores of the planet. Its molecular structure defies classification. It's not from here, but it is here. It always has been. Some think it's a relic of a forgotten civilization, one that knew things we still don't. Others think it's not a statue at all, but something wearing a statue, like a cocoon or armor, waiting for a signal or a time. There's even one theory that chills the blood, that it's not vibrating, in warning, but in sync, that something else, deep in the earth or far beyond it, is pulsing too. And one day, the rhythm will match, and when the final beat aligns, the statue will rise. The bridge that led to nowhere, and back. Ruins of a massive stone bridge, found in a remote forest, with no river beneath it, and no settlements on either side. Just the remains of torches, scattered footprints and tools frozen in time. In the dense heart of a forest untouched for centuries, far from any modern road or visible trail, there lies the ruins of something too massive, too deliberate, to belong to the wilderness. Tall stone pillars rise in the mist, worn and crumbling, as if they had been standing for 1,000 years or more. Beneath them, slabs of granite stretch across a shallow dip in the land, an expanse of carved stone that forms the outline of what once was a bridge. But there is no river beneath it, no stream, not even a dry ravine, just solid, moss-covered forest floor. The bridge stands over flat land, no erosion, no evidence of water ever flowing here. And even stranger, the bridge doesn't connect anything. On one side, dense woods. On the other, more of the same. No settlements, no ruins of nearby towns, no foundations, no reason for a crossing. Just the remains of something monumental, rising from nowhere, leading to nowhere, and yet unmistakably traveled. The site was first discovered by a cartographer who had gone off course while mapping elevation data for a conservation project. He followed what looked like a deer path that twisted through thick brush, eventually opening into a clearing where the air felt unnaturally still. That's when he saw it, the stones, perfectly aligned, despite their age. Chisel marks still visible, ivy twisting over cracks that hadn't collapsed. It didn't match anything he'd seen on satellite maps. It didn't match any known structure in the region. He sent photos. Experts were called. Excavation began slowly, carefully, peeling back centuries of soil and root systems. What they found only deepened the mystery. Dozens of torches, burnt out, but still upright, still standing in orderly lines along the edges of the stone. Not modern flashlights or oil lamps, ancient-style torches, their wooden shafts petrified by time, preserved unnaturally well beneath layers of moss and lichen. They hadn't fallen over. It was as if whoever placed them never came back for them. Near the midpoint of the bridge, they found footprints, human, mostly, a few barefoot, a few in soft leather soles, all of them facing the same direction, out onto the bridge, none returning. Even more chilling, at the far end of the bridge the prints stop, mid-stride, no turn, no fade into the forest, just an abrupt end, as if the people who made them vanished into the air. Closer to the edges of the bridge, scattered tools were recovered, metal hammers, shaped stone blades, bowls, leather pouches, all in near pristine condition. No corrosion, no animal disturbance, no sign of violence, as if they had been laid down gently and forgotten in an instant. Some of the pouches contained dried herbs, some had pigment powders, red, black, and pale blue. There were even fragments of woven cloth, frayed at the edges but still holding their dyes. One piece had a symbol embroidered into it. No one has been able to translate it. Theories began to emerge. The most conventional suggested that the bridge was ceremonial, a sacred space, perhaps part of a ritual that didn't require it to connect two physical places. Others suggested the land had once looked different, that a river had run beneath it millennia ago, long since diverted or dried up. But core samples of the soil below showed no signs of sediment, no erosion, no water flow, not even the minerals typical of ancient riverbeds. Then came the deeper scans. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a strange layering beneath the bridge, a narrow, dense band of material, almost like a sheet of metal running directly beneath the stone structure, perfectly aligned, unbroken. When a probe was drilled, the equipment malfunctioned, compass readings flipped, devices began logging time incorrectly, the data became corrupted. The team stepped back. They left markers, caution tape, motion sensors. But every time they returned, something was off. Sensors had been moved, cables unplugged, tools found in different places, no signs of animals, no human footprints, and the forest always seemed quieter than it should be. Then came the night footage. A single camera, mounted to observe the site overnight, recorded something unsettling. At 3:14 a.m., the camera's feed flickered. When it returned, the torches, those same torches buried in the stone for centuries, appeared in the footage, burning, flickering, as if time had folded, as if for a moment, the bridge had remembered what it once was. The footage ended seconds later. When the team reviewed the camera in person the next day, the tape was blank. Only the transmitted footage, saved off-site, held the anomaly. They decided not to stay overnight again. One researcher proposed a radical theory, that the bridge wasn't just architectural, it was the boundary, a space meant to be crossed only during a specific time, or under specific conditions. A portal, not in the science fiction sense, but in the ancient way, when people believed some places connected to others not by distance, but by intention. The footprints? They weren't just people walking, they were pilgrims, or messengers, or sacrifices. But where did they go? The forest around the bridge was scanned for miles, still no signs of any other structures, no ruins, no buried foundations, no graves, nothing. It was as if the entire bridge had been built solely for the purpose of being crossed, once, and never returned from. The bridge remains where it always has. The forest grows tighter around it, but those who visit say the air feels strange there. Pressure behind the ears, a stillness in the chest. Birds don't fly overhead, no insects hum near its stones, and when you stand at its edge, especially just before sunrise, you can feel something under your feet. Not a vibration, not movement, a hum. As if deep below, something is still alive, still waiting. And sometimes, just sometimes, people claim they see shapes at the far end of the bridge. Faint, like shadows cast through fog. Figures that shouldn't be there. Figures that turn, and look back. The artifact that erased sound. It was no larger than a child's hand. Smooth, round, metallic. Discovered in the rubble of a collapsed cliffside cave during a minor excavation in the Caucasus Mountains. The object didn't seem particularly impressive at first glance. No engravings, no symbols, just a flat silver disc, cold and featureless. But when the first archaeologist picked it up, the world went quiet. At first he thought it was in his head, that the sudden stillness was just the isolation of the cave, the hush of altitude and stone. But when he tried to speak, nothing came out. His lips moved, but no sound followed. His radio fizzed out. Footsteps disappeared. Even the wind that howled outside the mouth of the cave seemed to vanish into silence. They called in a second team. Carefully they approached the disc again, this time leaving it untouched on a cloth-draped table. Microphones, audio sensors, and geophones were placed all around it. The results were the same. As long as someone came within 10 feet of the object, all audio data dropped to zero. Not just muffled, erased, as if sound itself ceased to exist within its radius. The team was baffled. There was no visible mechanism, no vents, no signal emissions. The disc didn't seem to draw power or emit heat. It didn't even respond to electromagnetic scans, but its effect was absolute. One researcher tried to set off a firecracker near the disc. What should have been a deafening crack echoed as complete silence. The pressure wave still hit his chest, the smoke still rose, but the sound was gone. The disc, it seemed, nullified vibration, and it worked both ways. No noise entered the field either. Outside observers heard nothing from within the radius. If someone walked in and spoke, those outside would see their mouth move. But no sound emerged. But then it got stranger. Animals refused to go near it. A dog brought on site for a sensory study flattened itself to the ground and whimpered as it neared the field, refusing to go further. Birds flying overhead veered off course. Even insects gave the object a wide berth, as if instinctively repelled. Some started calling it the sound eater. Theories poured in, some scientific, others outlandish. One physicist suggested it wasn't canceling sound, but disrupting time at a quantum level, pausing the vibration of molecules for microseconds at a time. Another proposed it was creating a form of localized vacuum, one that erased pressure waves before they could travel, but that didn't explain the dreams. Several team members reported strange auditory hallucinations at night, despite sleeping hundreds of feet away from the artifact. Some heard whispers in languages they didn't recognize. Others heard music, distant and mechanical, like a warped lullaby played on broken instruments. The most disturbing account came from a technician assigned to data collection. He entered the silent radius alone, sat beside the disk, and recorded a handwritten log. He described a sudden ringing in his head, a pure tone rising from silence like a scream held in reverse. Then, nothing, just blackness. He awoke an hour later, lying outside the radius, the disk still resting where he left it. No one saw him move. The cameras glitched during that time, showing only a white static wash across the footage. His watch had stopped for exactly 47 minutes. When asked what he remembered, he said one word: listening. From there, the government stepped in. The artifact was removed under armed escort and taken to an undisclosed facility. All involved were made to sign gag orders. The cave where it was found was collapsed with charges. Officially, the item was logged as a weathered iron sample with anomalous properties, its true function classified. But some things can't be hidden forever. Years later, a similar disc surfaced briefly in the black market before being seized. Rumors hinted it had been found in the ruins of a collapsed monastery in Tibet, embedded in a stone statue's forehead. That one was said to whisper instead of silence. A counterpart, or maybe a mirror. And now some scientists wonder, are these ancient technologies part of a forgotten system? One that controls sound, space, and thought? Were they tools of communication, or tools of control? And what would happen if one were broken, or turned on fully? No one knows what powers the artifact that erased sound, but one thing is certain: silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes silence is a warning, and sometimes silence listens back.